I investigate chilling cases. This is my story. Part 1: The Tall Woman's Tomb. They say everyone has one haunting case that stays with them forever. But if you only have one, perhaps you haven't truly understood the cruelty of this profession. Being a detective means stepping into a dark world where the light of hope rarely shines and happy endings are a distant illusion. You don't deal with happily ever afters. You confront stark, cold truths. Sometimes a case can resolve easily. A missing child found playing at a neighbor's house, or a seemingly harmless argument almost turning tragic, but luckily, the bullet went astray. Cases open and close. People return home, sometimes with smiles, sometimes to the precarious lives they once had. But that's not often how it goes. One thing you learn quickly in this job is just how different we all truly are. Each person leads you on a unique journey, fraught with challenges every time you try to truly understand the one you're investigating. But most of the time, you only scratch the surface, unable to truly fathom their souls. Even when you solve a case, you've opened doors that can never be closed, and from then on, you've meddled in lives, and that lingers far beyond the day the gavel falls. People continue to die long after a guilty verdict. A woman continues to weep after her abuser is sentenced, and someone continues to be missing simply because you've moved on to another case. Ultimately, if you can't bear to be haunted by what will slowly accumulate into many cases rather than just one, then this job isn't for you. With that said, when the case of a missing girl was casually placed on my desk one rainy August afternoon, I didn't hesitate to prioritize it. "Don't underestimate this one, Detective Smith." The stern voice of the woman standing over me echoed as her finger pressed firmly on the paperwork. Detective Jones had been harsh with me from day one. I'm not sure what started the rivalry between us, but from our first conversation, I knew she'd lived a challenging life. As someone who enjoys pushing others' boundaries, I found it amusing to provoke her, which only made her push me harder. But this time, I could sense she wasn't in the mood for jokes. "The chief wants you on this immediately. He said if you don't make progress, he'll come after me, and that means I'll come after you." I glanced at the stack of papers on the desk, quickly scanning them, my hand lightly scratching my short beard as I reviewed. "Missing child, huh? Damn. All right, I get why he wants me on this one. But why does he think I need supervision?" She shrugged, a heavy gesture of vague indifference. "The chief just cares deeply about this one being thoroughly investigated." As I began to skim the documents, I quickly realized there wasn't much to go on. Faye Mizuki was a normal 15-year-old girl. From what I could see, nothing stood out, and that was the problem. All we had to go on were some interviews with acquaintances, a few known locations, and testimonies from her family. This was very strange. Why would a girl living a normal life disappear? I didn't think she was the type to run away, so there were clearly two possibilities. Either everything we knew about her was wrong, or she had been abducted. There wasn't much to go on, but narrowing a disappearance down to two scenarios immediately eliminated many potential dead ends, and by the next day, I planned to have only one scenario left. I could feel determination beginning to spread through my body. In response, I took a large gulp of cold coffee near my computer as I started typing frantically. I could feel the inspiration making the neurons in my brain fire off like in an old Western shootout. Detective Jones had seen me like this before. As soon as she noticed me entering work mode, she turned away without a word and let me focus on the job. I think I even caught a slight, fleeting smile as she left me to my work. And when I did my work, I found exactly what I was looking for: absolutely nothing. Even when I thoroughly investigated her family, near and far, there wasn't a single notable piece of information. These people were completely clean, not even a traffic ticket. As I reviewed some of the documents I'd been given in more detail, I noticed a trend among the interviewed individuals. They all came from places Faye frequented, but what they said was almost identical. Quiet, polite, never stood out in her friend group. If I didn't know any better, I'd think they didn't even know she existed, almost as if they were just talking about some generic teenager. The only one who was a little different was the owner of an Italian restaurant. He mentioned that she and her family frequented the restaurant, and Faye seemed very close to her parents. Unlike a typical teenager, Faye always stuck with them. She wanted a close relationship with her parents and never missed an opportunity to go out with them to bury herself in her phone. If only every child were like that, but I digress. This information was still helpful, regardless. I had a picture of who Faye was, and though I still had to do my due diligence with the facts, I knew what I was looking for. I was looking for something or someone that stood out amidst the mundane. However, I also knew I wouldn't be able to do that by talking to the people who were already familiar with that aspect of her. The next morning, I was drinking warm coffee in Principal Thompson's office. I could immediately tell that Mrs. Thompson was the type of person who wouldn't tolerate nonsense. She projected an austere demeanor, her tongue sharp as a razor, betraying the image of a sweet old lady someone might easily mistake her for. "I've already spoken to the police. I don't know why you're here," she said, waving her hand, and I understood. "Mrs. Thompson," I began, "I just want to ask a few additional questions, if you don't mind." This must have offended her because she stopped typing and looked at me with an expression that said, "Are you serious?" I could see through her dark-framed glasses that she was rolling her eyes, and she carefully emphasized each word. "I don't know what happened. I know you people are slow, but that should be clear." As a black detective in an area without many black people, you always expect some people to treat you differently. But her bluntness still caught me off guard. As much as I wanted to scold her on the spot and remind her that I didn't care if she was a teacher because I was still the police, I knew I needed information from her. I instead forced a smile and squeezed out a fake laugh. "Look, I really don't want to take up too much of your time. If you say you don't know anything about her disappearance, fine. But surely you know if she'd been in any trouble, perhaps some conflict with a teacher or a fellow student." To her credit, she paused to think for a moment. "Her history teacher, Mr. Berkeley. He's mentioned her name a few times, and I found it odd because she'd never had problems in any other class. Perhaps he knows something." Bingo, a sign of the unusual in her otherwise ordinary life. "And when can I see him?" I asked. "If you come back during lunch, he'll be in room 2105. She returned her attention to her computer, her hand waving dismissively towards the door, implying that she'd done her part to point me in the right direction and that I needed to leave her alone. I got the hint and walked towards the exit, but couldn't help but stop at the door. "You know," I said, "I used to be the fastest kid in my class, but when you're past 30, I guess you're not as fast as you used to be. But I guess that's something you already knew decades ago, huh? What a shame." And with that, I slipped out the door, glancing back only to see a furious expression on her face. As the clock struck 12, I returned to meet Mr. Berkeley. I stepped into the cluttered classroom and noticed the short, bald man sitting behind a desk with a neat stack of papers beside him. I waited for a moment near the door, but it wasn't until I deliberately cleared my throat to get his attention that he looked up at me. "Oh," he said, startled, jumping in his seat. "I apologize, I didn't see you there. You must be the annoying detective I was told I needed to speak with." "Annoying detective?" I chuckled. "Maybe from Monday to Sunday, but outside of those hours, I swear I'm the sweetest person in the world." He laughed heartily, and the atmosphere seemed to lighten a bit. "How can I help you, detective?" Smith, Detective Smith," I said, pulling a chair from a nearby desk and opening the notepad app on my phone. "You're Faye Mizuki's history teacher, correct? I'm guessing you've heard about her disappearance. Is there anything notable you can tell me about her?" He thought for a moment. "No, not really. Faye was a pretty good student, did all her homework, came to class on time, got good grades, all that." "Sounds more than just pretty good to me, doesn't it?" I interjected. "I heard from my sources that she was an A student, so surely she was better than that." He shrugged. "I suppose so. There wasn't anything big to differentiate Faye from other outstanding students, in my opinion." "Nothing big, so let's talk about the small things then." "Well, just some disciplinary issues. She was very chatty in class, and I had to have a few conversations with her about being disruptive. Everything I've read about her says she was a quiet girl. Seems a bit odd that she'd suddenly become a chatterbox in your class, doesn't it? Not that I don't believe you, but..." "Things change when her best friend is in the class." "Best friend, do you know their name?" "Hannah Sterling. 16 years old, blonde hair, freckles, green eyes. I think she played water polo with Faye." It was interesting that Hannah hadn't been mentioned in any of the reports I'd read. How could we have missed a best friend? I wanted to learn more about this fact, but as a 50-year-old teacher, Mr. Berkeley didn't have much information about these kids' personal lives. Hannah Sterling, I wonder, I mused. From what I've gathered, she's not someone I knew as one of Faye's main friends, but they did talk a lot. They seemed very friendly in that class, that's all I can say, he said. Whether they hung out outside of class or not isn't in my professional purview, but I always assumed they were close. The information pipeline there began to run dry. After a few more questions, I thanked Mr. Berkeley for his help and proceeded back to my car. On my way out, I texted the officers at the station to find me all the information on Hannah Sterling. I also asked them to recheck the individuals we'd already interviewed to see if they recognized her name or description. By evening, I had exactly what I needed: a location and all the necessary background knowledge to blow this case wide open. Hannah actually had quite a history: drug dealing, runaway attempts, multiple school suspensions, and a long list of other minor infractions. She was a young girl on the wrong path, not someone you'd expect Faye to be associated with, and clearly not someone Faye's family expected her to be associated with. From an additional interview one of my officers conducted, I learned that Faye and Hannah were close friends since middle school, but Faye's parents disapproved of the relationship and thought the two had cut ties. Even Faye's closest friends didn't know the two were still close. This was unusual. This stood out amidst the mundane, and perhaps was the key to finding Faye. Right on cue, I knocked on her door, badge held high. I'd seen this happen many times. Hannah's parents didn't put up much of a fuss when I said I needed to speak with her alone for a few minutes. For the next few minutes, the young girl sat across from me in the living room, seemingly trying to stop my heart with her stare. Clearly, the last thing she wanted to do was talk to the police, even if her friend's life might be in danger. "Whatever happened, I didn't do it," she said, without a trace of emotion in her voice. She simply looked straight at me with her arms crossed. "Well then, I guess my work here is done," I joked. She didn't laugh, not even a smirk. I cleared my throat and continued. "Look, all I care about is finding Faye, and I have reason to believe you can help me do that." She scoffed. "Why me? I had nothing to do with what happened. Perhaps you should go find the person who actually is responsible." Clearly, I couldn't convince her and needed to try a different strategy. "All right, listen. I believe you. I'm not here to get you in trouble. I just want to know some things that I think others aren't willing or able to tell me. What you say won't be used against you, but I need your help." "How do I know you're not just saying that to get me to talk?" "Because you have my promise that if you ever get arrested for any reason in the future, I will stand by you and vouch for you. I know you've lived a tough life, and it would certainly be to your advantage to have an insider who can vouch for you if you work with me, right?" She raised one eyebrow and thought for a moment. I could see that my offer had piqued her interest. "I still don't know how I can help." I quickly opened my notepad app and replied, "All I need is for you to lead the way. First, why didn't Faye's parents know about you if you were still friends?" She shrugged. "We didn't really publicize our friendship. Faye was very good, and us hanging out together would have tarnished her image. But I truly cared about her, and we had fun when we were together." "So it's fair to say you hid this relationship." "I guess so. We'd meet up on weekends when she wasn't with her other friends, mostly at secret spots I knew around here." "And where were these spots?" She giggled, and I could see her body beginning to relax. "I'm certainly not telling you that, cop, but it doesn't matter, she wouldn't be there anyway. Faye is terrible at remembering directions. Plus, she had no reason to go there without me anyway. A young person breaking out of her mundane life is interesting, though. I'm guessing she also sought you out to experiment with other new things, too, right?" "You mean she'd started smoking and drinking a bit recently?" "Yeah." "Really? You two are teenagers. How did you get drugs?" "Cigarettes came from various sources," she said with a slight smile. "I can't say exactly. As for alcohol, it was usually brought by a guy we used to smoke with." "A third party in this story," I mumbled to myself. I leaned in for more details. "A guy you smoked with? Where did you meet him, and what's his name?" "We just knew each other through some mutual people. I think his name was Walter, something. 17 years old, tall, pale skin, dark circles under his eyes like he hadn't slept in weeks. I think he goes to one of the schools around here." "Did he and Faye talk much?" Faye mentioned him a little bit to me, and I think there was a bit of something between them, but nothing too special for me to notice. After about half an hour of asking standard questions and exchanging phone numbers, I left, my mind made up. Every lead pointed me to this Walter kid. Something in my gut told me he knew exactly where Faye was, and one way or another, I was going to get the information out of him. The next day at the office, I was frantically writing reports and trying to figure out who this kid was, but a name and a vague description weren't enough. Nothing in our database helped, and I feared I'd have to comb through every kid named Walter in the area. Frustrated, I decided to step outside for some fresh air, but before I could reach the door, I bumped into Detective Jones. "Detective Smith," she said with a slightly sharp tone. "How's your case progressing? It's been a few days, you know what they say about 48 hours, right? You can't slack off." I shook my head and raised my hands. "I'm making progress. I think I'm close to solving it. Just one minor detail needs to be resolved, and then I'll be full steam ahead." She leaned against the wall, sipping her coffee. "And what's that?" "Some kid named Walter. Something. 17 years old, tall, pale skin, black hair, dark circles under his eyes. Seems like he lives in the area, but I have no leads on where to find him." She thought for a moment, then snapped her fingers. Without a word, she sprinted off. A few minutes later, she returned and motioned for me to follow. A couple of officers were sitting around a computer with a picture of a rather rough-looking boy. "Is this the guy you're looking for, detective?" one of the younger officers asked in a thick New York accent. "We've had a few calls about him before. He's run away a few times, and we've had to bring him back. Nothing else on his record, though. Walter Cran. Hopefully, that's your guy." I snapped a picture of the boy and sent it to Hannah. Within minutes, I received a reply confirming it was him. My eyes widened as I read her message. Immediately, I got Walter's school address from the guys at the computer and bolted out the door, yelling that I owed them big time. I drove from the station to the school in record time. In mere seconds, I went from asking the principal to pull Walter out of class to sitting down with the kid in a private room. From the start, I could tell he was nervous. I didn't even have to say Faye's name for him to know exactly why we were sitting across from each other. Without saying a word, I wanted him to know I was sizing him up, but clearly, I didn't have to do much to scare him. Just as Hannah said, he looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. He was gaunt, smelled faintly of cigarettes, and struggled to look me in the eye. But even more than that, his disheveled appearance, baggy clothes, and pale skin suggested he was dealing with something incredibly serious. There were no obvious signs of bruising to indicate abuse, but that didn't mean nothing was going on. Either way, something was truly wrong. I don't know why I'm here," he stammered. "I'm not in the mood for games. Look, kid, there's a missing girl, and I have reason to believe you know something." "Why me?" I sighed. "Tell me how you know Hannah Sterling, and don't lie. I've spoken to enough people to know the truth here, and I swear it will look very bad for you if you start trying to deceive me." He took the bait. Okay, she sells me drugs." "What kind of drugs?" I pressed. Just weed," he replied softly. "Do you ever smoke weed with Hannah?" "Sometimes, yeah." "Why, was anyone else there? And if so, what were their names?" There was a girl named Faye." "Bingo, did you ever talk to Faye outside of smoking with Hannah?" He started to choke up, his hands twitching for a moment, and I could see him weighing whether to confess. I realized I'd probably pushed too hard and eased off the pressure a bit. "Look, Walter, I know this is hard, and I don't want you to worry about getting in trouble or anything." I leaned forward and put my hand on his shoulder. "But right now, I don't care about anything else. I just need to find out where Faye is. Please help me." He shook his head. "You don't understand, you won't believe me." I leaned back in my chair and said in a softer tone, "Just try me. Start from the beginning." He took a deep breath before slowly exhaling and nodding. "I've been dealing with something. It's been haunting me for the past few months. I'm really scared. It says it's going to take me to its home, just like it's taken others, unless I give it something in return. It visits me every night. I know it's getting closer and closer to taking me. It reminds me every day of what it wants. I started buying weed from Hannah to help me sleep, and that's when I met Faye. She was a good girl, just a bit naive. I could tell she had a bit of a crush on me, and I took advantage of that. I'm so sorry I did that, but I needed someone to replace me. I told her I knew a cool spot where we could hang out, so I drove her there, and that's where you'll find her. At its home. I swear I didn't hurt her, but you have to understand, nothing about this makes sense to me. I couldn't tell if Walter was confessing to a murder, perhaps with an accomplice, or if he was hinting at something else entirely. Perhaps I didn't realize how long I'd been lost in thought and notes because before I knew it, the kid had started rocking back and forth, crying about how sorry he was. I tried to reassure him, but it was no use. The best I could do was wait until his panic subsided, but even then, he insisted repeatedly that he hadn't harmed Faye and that he was only doing what he could to survive. The kid was genuinely terrified, and suddenly his appearance made more sense. This was the result of stress, and a lot of it. Eventually, I got the address of the place and all of Walter's contact information, telling him I'd be in touch. On my way out, I spent a few minutes convincing the principal that she should let Walter go home for the day. Whatever was going on, he was just a teenager under a lot of pressure. I wouldn't hesitate to bring him to justice if and when the time came, but I also felt a pang of empathy for what he was going through. She seemed to respect my suggestion, but I wasn't sure if she'd actually do anything. That was a secondary concern anyway. I had a location about a 45-minute drive away, and nothing was going to stop me from getting there. I hopped in my car and sped off towards the address, my attention never leaving the road ahead and my mind solely focused on finding Faye. No other thoughts crept in. When I finally reached the nearly dilapidated house in the middle of a random plot of land surrounded by nothingness, I truly started to fear the worst. From its appearance, it was an old, two-story farmhouse that had been abandoned. I'd been doing this job long enough to know that with nothing around for miles, this would be a perfect place for a murder. Even standing a reasonable distance from the old farmhouse, I could smell a strong stench. As I got closer, the smell only grew more horrific. What the hell is this? I thought to myself as I approached the door. A simple push was all it took to open it, but what I saw inside. Oh God, it was horrible. Light from outside streamed through gaps in the dilapidated farmhouse, illuminating bodies scattered around. Most appeared to be animal carcasses, but there was no mistaking that there were a few human bodies, and most of them were very young. What kind of sick individual could do something like this? I thought to myself. I unholstered my gun and yelled for anyone present to come out slowly with their hands up. I waited for about 30 seconds with no response from anywhere in the building. I yelled again and still no answer. But even in that silence, I knew I wasn't alone. To this day, I don't understand what compelled me to do it, but I had an inexplicable urge to look up. For a moment, I thought I saw something like a giant, four-legged spider crawl from the ceiling and into a room on the second floor. My brain couldn't process what it had just seen. If that was a spider, it must have been the length of a polar bear. It must have been at least 9 feet long, with legs the length of its body. But the more I thought about it, the more I wondered what kind of spider had smooth skin with a head of long, human-like black hair. I ran up an old wooden staircase, gun aimed forward, tracking the thing into the room I'd seen it enter. What stood before me was certainly not a spider. It was a woman. She stood about 9 feet tall, as I had initially estimated. Her body was emaciated with pallid gray skin, and her arms dragged behind her on the ground. But it wasn't just her impossibly proportioned body that chilled me to the bone. It was her face. She had no eyes, and her lips were a grotesque mess, the corners of her mouth stretching down past her chin in a permanent, distorted smile. Inside her mouth, she seemed to be sucking on something I assumed was a skull, like a giant lollipop. Her long, gray tongue curled around it, and thick white drool dripped from her mouth as she moved it. I wanted to vomit at the sight. My body froze in fear. I didn't know what to do or how to react. For a moment, we just stared at each other until I heard a groan. My eyes shifted from the monster before me to the source of the sound. In the same room was a young girl, one I recognized, Faye Mizuki. She lay on the ground, eyes rolled back into her head, looking as if she were covered in dirt. I'd finally found her, but I knew this creature wouldn't let me take her easily. I had to make a quick decision. It was now or never. I fired several shots at the creature and rushed towards Faye to pull her out, but after only a few steps, I was violently shoved backward and slammed to the floor. Despite no apparent muscle, She was incredibly strong. I tried to crawl for my gun, but she snatched it right next to me and flung it into a dark corner. I was now completely unarmed. As I realized what had happened, I felt her icy fingers wrap tightly around my throat. She dragged me down to the ground floor and slammed me against a rotting wooden wall. I struggled to breathe under her grip, and as my vision began to blur, I could see her gray face drawing closer to mine. 2 words she uttered in a putrid breath, and a deep, guttural voice sent shivers down my spine. "Yours old." I knew she wouldn't say it again, and in reality, I had no way to object. I glanced at the room on the second floor and saw Faye looking down at me with tear-filled eyes. And what did I do? I want to say I stayed and, like a good cop, fought against all odds to do the right thing, but no. With just one more look at that towering figure, I ran. I ran like a coward, tail between my legs. The fear of that moment and that damn thing was too overwhelming. I didn't even dare to look back at the farmhouse until I was safely locked in my car and calling for backup. The desperation in my voice as I pleaded with them to save me from that monster was palpable. It took a long time for them to arrive, and during that time I tried to process what had happened. When the officers arrived, I recounted what had transpired, and they just looked at me with disbelieving eyes. Realizing they didn't truly believe me, I just told them to shoot anything that moved in there, except for the little girl. I stood by, watching them disappear into the house, but no sense of comfort came to me. A few minutes later, I saw a familiar car pull up beside me, and a gruff voice called my name. Turning to the large man behind me, I asked, "Chief, what are you doing here?" He fumbled in his pocket for a moment, then pulled out a lighter and a cigarette, igniting it as he replied, "I wanted to see this one for myself. You look awful, Smith. What the hell happened?" The horrific images of that creature flashed through my mind, and I shook my head in disgust at the thoughts. I found the girl and something else. Look, everything will be in my report tomorrow, but when the officers take down whatever abomination is in there, you need to see it with your own eyes. He looked at me for a moment, taking a drag on his cigarette. I couldn't read anything from him. All I knew was that the expression on his face wasn't disbelief, but something else entirely. Perhaps pity. I'll never know. Either way, he just played into my fear and simply said, "Go home, Smith. We'll handle everything from here. You've worked hard on this one, and you look like you've been beaten black and blue. Detective Jones will be on the scene soon to handle the rest." I was stunned and found myself speaking louder than usual. "What? No, I have to see this through. I have to make sure the girl is safe." His gaze showed that he had no intention of arguing with me. "No, Smith, you're going home. We'll take care of everything, I promise you." I wanted to protest. I wanted to scream that this was ridiculous, but I knew my place, and I knew I had no power to press the issue. Reluctantly, I got in my car and drove home, angry at the world. That night was horrible. I couldn't stop thinking about the monster I'd faced or my conversation with Walter, which now made complete sense. That thing was hunting him, and it was smart enough to get him to sacrifice someone else in his place. I also couldn't sleep, knowing that thing was coming for me. Damn, maybe that's why he ran away, too. He was probably trying to get as far away from it as possible, but he knew he'd never succeed until either it got him or it got someone else. But why? Why didn't it just take him? Why did it care who the victim was if it just needed to feed? Did it enjoy toying with people? Did it have a sick mind to match its disgusting appearance? I wish I knew. The next day, I tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy. My morning was fine, though I did scare myself a few times, thinking that woman had found her way to my house. I threw myself into my work the next day, completing reports in record time. I wanted to hand it to the chief myself, partly so I could ask him about what had happened the day before. But in response, he just asked me to close and lock the door. "Sit down, Smith," he said calmly, and I obeyed. "Look, I appreciate the work you've done. You're a good cop, a very good one, but here's what's going to happen. I know you. You're honest. You want to do things the right way, and your report would reflect that, wouldn't it?" "Yes, sir," I replied cautiously. "I respect that, but this report on my desk, it doesn't exist." He pulled a folder from his desk. "This is actually the report you emailed me today," and handed it to me. "It says you spoke with the Walter kid. He said Faye tried a new drug, found a place to use them, was killed by an unknown assailant, and the farmhouse she was using burned down. Probably caused by a homeless person's accident. That sounds more realistic, doesn't it?" What was he telling me? My blood boiled, and it took all the strength in me not to lunge at him immediately and punch him square in the face. "Sir, that's not at all what happened. The little girl was alive when I saw her. There were armed officers going in to get her out." He nodded, and then what, Smith? They fought a creature of the night like superheroes. "You were there, no way they didn't see, no way you didn't see." I began to break down. He sighed and leaned back in his chair. "I was there, and I saw a lot. Look, lying doesn't do anyone any good, Smith. There are things out there, things we are completely incapable of dealing with." "So we just run and hide?" I retorted angrily. "Isn't that what you did?" He calmly replied, "You're right." His words stung like a salty blade twisting in my gut. What else could I say? "But that's not what we do. I was wrong." He let out a long sigh. "Let's assume everyone believed us. We don't live in a world where anyone can accept that things that go bump in the night are real. Even if we said it was true, we'd be seen as lunatics who weren't doing our jobs. But let's assume that wasn't the case. Where do we go from there? Arrest someone like her? Lock her in a cell with all the other criminals? Smith, you think burning down that farmhouse killed her? Hell no, it just scared her off. We truly aren't equipped to deal with things like that. So what's the best next step? Prevent panic. Move those things to less populated areas if possible. But otherwise, act as if everything is normal and move on. We focus on the actual criminals we can deal with." I was speechless. My own chief was telling me to forget that a family had lost their daughter because he didn't think there was anything we could do to help. The only thing left to ask was, "Did you know?" He was silent for a moment and said, "I had a hunch. I've seen cases like this before. After talking to some other counties about similar disappearances, the signs pointed to this possibly being the case. When your frantic call came through, I wanted to confirm it for myself. Smith, you did a good job. This is an issue we've needed to deal with for a long time, And if she strikes again," I interrupted. "Then we'll figure out another solution, I suppose. Look, you're going to be assigned some easy cases for a while. You deserve a break, and I don't want you to see anything horrific, even by normal standards, for a while. But I need you to agree to this. Trust me." Without a word, I nodded and walked out. I never disclosed anything to anyone. I never even talked about it with the officers I knew were there. Little did I know that I would eventually become a trusted individual in these types of cases. Someone good enough to investigate and trustworthy enough to stay silent. It was hard to live with, knowing the truly messed up and horrifying parts of this world. The creatures we live among every day doing horrific things while those responsible for protecting us stand by and do nothing. It was a major source of conflict and eventually led to my departure. But these stories will always stay with me, forever etched into my memory as moments that truly shaped my life. When the time comes, I'll share more of these stories, but for now, just remember, when you hear something go bump in the night, don't for a second think it can't reach out and pull you away. Stay safe, everyone. Part 2, The Stalker. When people think of the police, I assume they often mistakenly believe we are heroes, supermen who arrive just in time with shining badges, ready to stop bad guys from doing bad things. But the reality is far from it. We have no superpowers, no ability to see every crime in the area, and certainly can't react as quickly as in the latest action movie. Ultimately, we are just ordinary people confronting situations where the law requires us to intervene. But when you dig deeper, you'll see the darker side of this job: racism, abuse of power, violence aspects some people might see daily, while others are completely blind to them. So, does that mean we are monsters dressed in pristine white uniforms? To some, perhaps, but to me, it means something else. In my opinion, we are a mirror reflection of society, with all its good and bad sides. We are complex and nuanced individuals who can appear as anything you want to see, or be limited by your own perception. And in this role as a police officer, you have to face that reality because you never know if how others see you is truly accurate. My shift began when the chief called me into his office. He was busy with a stack of paperwork, a toothpick clamped firmly in his mouth as if it were the only tool keeping him awake. I sat in silence for a few seconds, waiting for him to finish his notes before he pushed the papers aside and looked at me with a deep gaze. "Detective Smith," he began with his usual authoritative tone, "I need your opinion on a situation." "Of course," I replied with a hint of humor. As long as it's not relationship advice, because I'd definitely lead you straight to divorce within 2 months. A slight smile flickered across his stern face before he began to recount the story. A single mother, Mrs. Wilson, came in yesterday, desperately asking to speak with a senior officer. I was downstairs in administration getting documents and overheard her request. I approached, introduced myself, and we started talking. She told me she needed immediate police protection because her young son sees a man standing outside his window, staring at him almost every night. Police protection? I raised an eyebrow. It must be serious. Yes, but it's not that simple, he continued. Whatever the boy does, the man doesn't leave. Of course, every time she checks, no one is there, but the fear in the boy's eyes is real, and she wants us to station someone outside the house to catch the guy. I frowned in confusion. I don't understand. I mean, you really need my opinion on this? It seems pretty obvious. We can't just dispatch officers as bodyguards on demand. Without evidence of the guy's presence, there's not much we can do, right? Maybe she should install security cameras or invest in a gun. If she catches him on video, we can proceed with an investigation. The chief laughed, which I didn't expect since he rarely showed emotion. I like the way you think, Detective Smith. Straightforward and logical, but you missed one important thing. He was trying to lead me somewhere, but I couldn't quite grasp what he wanted. I raised an eyebrow. He noticed my confusion, pulled the toothpick from his mouth, and sighed as if exhaling smoke. You don't think a single mother would buy cameras? After a few nights, she installed the most expensive cameras she could find outside the boy's window. And, I asked. And of course, we're still sitting here without any evidence of a man's presence, yet she insists her son saw him last night. It took me a moment to put the pieces together in my head. Maybe someone is using a jamming device, or the boy is mistaken. The chief shrugged and leaned back in his chair. I don't know, but that's what you're going to find out. I've emailed you the address and details. This information made me feel unwelcome, and as much as I wanted to refuse, I knew I couldn't escape this case. Ever since my encounter with the tall woman, the chief and I had an understanding. He knew I had seen something not many people should know about, and if this case had signs of belonging to the supernatural world, I would be the one assigned to it. I left the chief's office, determined to investigate the case, my mind immediately going into overdrive. I headed straight to my desk to learn more about the situation. A single mother with a boy haunted by a man outside his window, with no evidence of the man's presence, at least not yet. Officer Ryan, who had been with us for over a year, startled me as I was lost in thought. He was the cheerful, optimistic type, always with a smile on his face. "Hello, detective," he said after taking a sip of diet soda. "I saw you just came out of the chief's office. Are you working on some secret project?" I stared at him blankly, and he winked, confusing me further. "Nothing secret, Officer Ryan. Just a potential breaking and entering and harassment case. Nothing big." He seemed disappointed. "Oh geez, that sounds a bit boring. Need any help?" "You just said it was boring, but you still want to help." "Sure, I always thought it would be interesting if I could learn from you." His enthusiasm was endearing, and I realized that if I wanted to solve this case, not only did I need to talk to the family, but I also needed to gather evidence. After all, 2 sets of eyes and ears are always better than one. Bracing myself for his over-the-top reaction, I agreed to let him come along, as long as he took notes and let me be in charge. Within half an hour, we were leaving the station and knocking on the door of the humble Wilson family home. It took a long time for anyone to answer, and when someone finally opened the door, I realized this situation was more serious than I thought. The middle-aged woman before me looked incredibly tired, with dark circles under her eyes and disheveled hair. "Mrs. Wilson," I began, pulling out my police badge. "I'm Detective Smith, and this is my partner, Officer Ryan. We're here to talk to you and your son about the stranger you've been seeing around the house. May we come in?" She looked at our badges indifferently, and when she realized who we were, her demeanor changed noticeably. "Oh, come in. I apologize for the mess." She quickly invited us into the living room and called her son, Lucas, to greet us. Everything happened so fast that I was almost taken aback by the sleepy boy who suddenly appeared before me. He was about 12 years old, looking tired, constantly rubbing his eyes and yawning. Lucas and Mrs. Wilson sat on the sofa, while Officer Ryan and I sat opposite them on chairs from the kitchen. "It's a pleasure to meet you both. I know this isn't a good time, but I'm here to help in any way I can," I said with a smile. "Mrs. Wilson, I'm told you came to the station to give a statement, but if you don't mind, I'd appreciate it if you could briefly explain exactly what's going on again." She nodded and took a deep breath before beginning. "It all started over a week ago. Lucas ran into my room crying because he saw something outside his window. I checked and saw nothing, so I assumed he just had a nightmare. But then the same thing happened the next night, and then the night after that." She paused to stroke Lucas's hair as he lay beside her. "But I never saw anything. After the third night, I installed security cameras. For 2 days, nothing happened. I thought it was over, but then suddenly it started again. That night, I checked the cameras and saw nothing, but I know my son isn't making this up. On the nights he can sleep, he has terrible nightmares, and on the nights he doesn't sleep, we're both wide awake. I've called the police, but nothing has happened." "I understand your situation," I said gently, "and I can only imagine how difficult this must be. I have a few additional questions." She nodded, and I continued. "I don't want to belittle your experience, but is it possible your son is mistaken? Is there a history of mental disorders in your family?" She almost looked offended by my determined answer. "No, my son isn't. He's not mistaken." Officer Ryan interjected. "We're not implying that, ma'am. We just want to understand everything so we can approach it correctly." Mrs. Wilson took a deep breath and nodded in agreement. "Lucas has never had these problems before. We once thought he might have ADHD, but when we took him to a specialist, everything was normal." "What about his father?" I asked. "Do you two have a good relationship?" "We do," she replied. "Lucas stays with him in the summer, and they talk on the phone every other night. We actually have a better relationship after the divorce." "Even so, I'd like you to send me your ex-husband's information. We'll check to make sure everything is all right. I also want to ask if you've ever thought about letting your son sleep in your room." "Of course, I've tried many times, but it's not a long-term solution. I've let Lucas sleep in my room, but once I'm asleep, he goes back to his own bed." She had good reason to be reluctant to let her young son be interrogated by a police officer, but Officer Ryan acted as an effective intermediary. He mentioned having worked as a child therapist before becoming a police officer, and I found it reasonable. Children are often more comfortable talking about traumatic events when their parents aren't present. Now it was just Lucas and me. The boy looked anxious. I tried to smile at him and reassure him that everything would be all right, but he didn't quite trust me. "Hey, Lucas, I know what you're going through is really scary, but my job is to make sure you and your mom are safe. For me to do that, I need you to answer as honestly as possible." The boy nodded. "Good. Do you recognize the person you see at the window?" He thought for a moment, trying to recall what he'd seen. "I don't recognize him, but his head is very big. Big eyes, his mouth stretches from one side of his head to the other, and his face is a bit wrinkled. Oh, and he's bald." Initially, this description didn't make much sense. I thought maybe someone was wearing a mask. "Does the person talk?" He shook his head. "I see. And what about the timing? Do you usually see the person at the same time every night?" He nodded. "Kind of. It only happens very late at night." "How late?" He answered nervously. "Don't tell my mom, okay? 2 or 3 in the morning. I shouldn't be up that late if I'm not already awake. Sometimes I just wake up suddenly, and he's just there." I chuckled. "Don't, Lucas, I won't say anything. But you really should go to bed earlier," I said with a wink. "Your mom says that sometimes you sleep in her room, but then you go back to your own bed. Why do you go back?" He shrugged. "I don't know, I don't even realize it." Sleepwalking, perhaps, I thought. After asking the boy a few more questions, I finally called his mother back to end the interview. I decided to check Lucas's room to see if there was anything noteworthy, but everything seemed fine. The only thing notable was that Lucas's curtains were drawn. I wondered how the boy could see anything outside the window with the curtains closed at night. Lucas insisted that they were always open every time he woke up in the middle of the night, even though he knew they were closed when he went to bed. Strange, but potentially an important detail. With no more questions, Officer Ryan and I exchanged contact information with them and left the house. I told Mrs. Wilson that I would get back to her with a request for police surveillance, but first, I wanted to investigate in a different way. I couldn't stop thinking about how none of this made sense. Everything seemed to be disjointed, and there were no obvious leads to pursue. A masked man appearing at 2:00 a.m. to scare a child. If he was a kidnapper, why just stand there staring into the room? Maybe he was a pervert who liked to watch children sleep. There was only one place I knew I could get concrete guidance. I reluctantly reached into my pocket and scrolled through my contacts for the most daunting name in my phone. "Hello, Smith, what do you want?" A strong voice boomed from the other end. "Well, Detective Jones, it's great to talk to you," I said, with a hint of exasperation before explaining the situation to her. "Anyway, I'm at the Wilsons' house. I've interviewed the family, but I'm still not clear on where to go next. Is there any way you could point me in the right direction?" She sighed. "Clearly you had other people do your work for you in school too, or is that a habit you picked up since joining the force? Oh, right, being an asshole, classic way to handle things. If you keep this up, maybe the guy stalking this kid will turn himself in out of pity for me." I didn't see it, but I knew she was rolling her eyes. "Funny, huh? I consider myself quite the comedian too. It's my second career choice if this cop thing doesn't work out." "Funny guy? If you want my advice, I'd recommend checking around the boys' window, ideally for footprints, fingerprints on the window, and so on. Also, talk to the neighbors to see if anyone saw anything. Maybe you'll get lucky and get some video from their security cameras. When you get back to the station, check if there's any guy in the area with a habit of peeping late at night with a mask on." I have to admit, she was good, and if all of that came up empty, then I'd truly question why we were wasting our time. But if you think he's going to come back, in theory, you could try to catch him yourself and conduct surveillance. I pondered her suggestions and thanked her before hanging up. Looking down the street at the identical houses, I knew we had a lot of work ahead of us, but Officer Ryan and I were ready to get started. By the end of the day, we'd worked quite a few extra hours and exhausted every avenue of investigation. When all was said and done, we had exactly the same amount of information as when we started. It seemed impossible. If there really was a guy running around peeping at kids, how had no one seen anything? I wrote my report for the day and planned to review everything the next morning. However, I didn't get that comfort when my phone vibrated at 2:00 a.m. with Mrs. Wilson's panicked voice on the other end. It happened again. Instinctively, I quickly dressed and rushed downstairs to her house. I jumped out of my car and ran around the block, looking for the man. When I saw nothing, I called other officers to be on the lookout for a masked man as Lucas had described. I waited with Mrs. Wilson and Lucas while a few officers scoured the area and spoke with neighbors. The fear in the boy's eyes spoke volumes, and the way his mother held him tight and whispered, no doubt comforting and loving words into his ear, made the situation even clearer. As time passed, it was the same old story. We had searched and found nothing. But even so, that moment made me believe that this went far beyond the lack of evidence. Something was deeply, profoundly wrong. I knew what Lucas saw was real. I thought about whether to continue pursuing this line of investigation. I needed a different approach, and perhaps Mrs. Wilson was right all along. Maybe we just needed to sit and wait for him to appear. The next day, I spoke with the chief about my lack of progress and proposed this new strategy. I thought that if we were consistently arriving late to the scene, Mrs. Wilson's request should be granted, despite the lack of evidence. I was convinced that the boys' anxieties were real and that we needed to take them seriously. To my surprise, he agreed, but only on the condition that I would be the only one on duty, just in case I discovered something unusual. We agreed to significantly cut down my office hours so I could spend 4 to 6 hours sitting outside the Wilson house. The first 2 days passed uneventfully. To be honest, I spent more time playing games on my phone and watching videos than I probably should have, but by the third day, things took a turn. Exactly at 1:00 a.m., the lights in Lucas's room turned on and my instincts screamed that this was it. But there was a problem. I didn't see anyone outside Lucas's window. The outside was as empty as the previous 2 nights. Nevertheless, I rushed towards their house with my gun in hand. I ran around the house, yelling, checking every possible hiding spot. As I went, and still nothing. I stood there, looking down the empty street, thinking about how ridiculous I must look. I was yelling into the air, brandishing a gun like a madman. In many neighborhoods, I would be the one people called the police on. It was one of those moments in my career that made me shake my head and ask myself, what the hell am I doing? I didn't know if this family was playing a trick on me, if all of this was just in the kid's head, or if there was a third option I hadn't explored. Either way, it was a deep frustration, a different kind of frustration than with other cases. You see, I can deal with having pieces of a puzzle but not knowing how to put them together. But when you don't know if you even have pieces, or even if you're completing a puzzle at all, it makes you question what you're doing with your life. I fully intended to confront them about this. If they were playing games with me, they would pay a heavy price. But as I entered the house, I quickly met Mrs. Wilson. She insisted on showing me something I never expected, a large handprint staring straight at me from the other side of the window. I pulled out my phone and quickly prepared to take a picture, but before I could even raise it to shoot, it vanished. A million questions flooded my mind. I had been staring at the window when the lights came on. I had run all around the house, damn it, and there wasn't a shred of evidence of anyone being out there. I called an officer to collect evidence, in case there was any DNA. However, while waiting for them to arrive, I wanted to talk to Lucas and Mrs. Wilson again. The familiar faces of stress were still present, but this time, I could make out something different: anticipation. It was as if I could hear them asking, "What are you going to do?" And frankly, I didn't know the answer. My conversation with them was simple. I asked basic questions that I'd asked a million times before. What did you see? Did you hear anything? Anything unusual? And so on. Ultimately, the DNA searches came up empty. All I could tell them was that I would try again tomorrow and advise them to stay with family or in a hotel tonight. As I was walking out of the house for the second time to regroup for the next day, Mrs. Wilson stopped me at the door. "Do you have children, Detective Smith?" she asked. Her question made me freeze for a moment. It took me a few seconds to regain my composure before turning back and replying awkwardly, "Me, why do you ask?" "If it were your child, what would you do?" My first thought was that I would do everything for him, but I knew that wasn't the kind of response she was looking for. "I would be there. I would be there to protect him at all costs. That's what a good father should do, right?" "Yes," she replied softly. "Please, take care of my son as if he were your own." I nodded and walked out without another word. As I got into my car and drove home, I tried to immerse myself in my instrumental music playlist. I tried to push the events of last night out of my mind, but my mind was still racing. How could there be a handprint? I had been there the whole time and seen nothing. No one came, and certainly no car. I needed a new way to catch this guy or convince the family to move out of town. By the time I got home, I had figured it out: a new perspective. It was such a simple solution that I almost laughed at myself for not doing this sooner. I realized I needed to follow my own advice and be there for Lucas. I decided that I would sit in Lucas's room every night until I had to confront the bastard behind all of this. Mrs. Wilson was hesitant when I pitched this idea the next morning, but with a little push and a phone call with Officer Ryan, I finally got the nod. Fueled by energy drinks and pure willpower, I sat in the chair, staring at that damn window while Lucas slept on the other side of the room. 10:00 p.m., nothing. 11:00 p.m., still nothing. The clock struck 12, and I still saw the same thing as before. 1 o'clock quickly turned into 2, and I could feel my eyelids starting to get heavy. I looked over at Lucas, who was illuminated by a nightlight. A small smile appeared on his face, and the way he shifted gently suggested he was having a good dream. I couldn't help but smile. In that moment, I couldn't help but remember why I had gone to such lengths to protect this boy. An inner feeling wanted to right a wrong, but I was so tired. My mind was convincing me that a short nap wouldn't hurt. As my eyes slowly closed, my entire body was cut off from the world until I heard a scream. I bolted upright in my chair and turned towards Lucas. He was cowering on his bed, staring at something. I followed his gaze to the window and couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was indeed a man, or some kind of twisted human shape. His entire pale head almost filled the window. His large eyes and dilated pupils were fixed on the boy, and even as I reached for my gun and aimed it directly at him, he didn't move his gaze. A thin, wrinkled mouth stretched from ear to ear in a neutral expression, however. that was in complete contrast to the rest of his face, which was slick and completely hairless. He also seemed to have a large, beak-like nose that sharply pointed downwards past his thin lips. His nose was almost like an arrow pointing down his rounded body and bony arms, both of which had liver spots and long gray hairs. But perhaps the most terrifying thing about him was that he seemed entirely two-dimensional, like he resided within the thin wall of the window rather than on the other side of it. It was as if he was projected onto the window, but that was impossible since there was no light coming from the other side of the window and no projector in Lucas's room. "Lucas, go find your mom and tell her to lock the door," I yelled. The boy didn't need to be told twice. In the blink of an eye, he was gone. After he left the room, I retreated towards the door, locking it with one hand and gripping my gun tightly with the other. Now, the man's large eyes shifted towards me, and his lips changed from a neutral expression to a thin smile. He said slowly in a deep but confident, calm voice, "You shouldn't have done that, Detective Smith." If all the hair on my body hadn't stood on end already, it certainly did now. Me, how did he know my name? I shot back with fake confidence. "Knowledge is power. I know you and your mistakes, we all do," he replied matter-of-factly. "What the hell is we?" "A society of humans no different than the one you inhabit." The way he spoke made me feel like a child facing an adult, one who had decades of experience I could only dream of. Still trying to maintain a calm facade, I tightened my grip on the gun and raised my voice a few octaves. "So, why is your society attacking this family? Why attack Lucas?" "Attack? No, I'm just observing. He's interesting." "You've scared a 12-year-old boy to death, and you're doing it just because you find him interesting? Don't give me that bullshit." He didn't reply. Instead, 2 handprints appeared on the window, and before I could understand what was happening, they pressed forward, distorting the glass as if it were a thin, malleable sheet of plastic. The hands began to reach towards me, and the memory of my encounter with the tall woman flashed through my mind. I couldn't let that happen again. I fired 3 shots at the window, hoping to destroy the only means he had of entering this world, but he still advanced, unfazed. Every instinct in me screamed to run from this house, but I knew that if I didn't stand my ground as a final barrier, he would surely attack Lucas and Mrs. Wilson. All I could hope for was to shatter every pane of that window. Before I knew it, the hands were right in front of my face. I squeezed my eyes shut and only opened them when I realized they weren't hurting me. Instead, they were caressing my face. He was feeling my stubble and stroking my hair. I didn't know whether to feel terrified or relieved, but I quickly knew which way I should lean when the hands suddenly gripped my temples and slammed my head hard against the wall. I dropped my gun in a panic. As I tried to reach for it, he pinned me to the floor. He violently grabbed my arm and dragged me towards the window. I could see him looking at me, smiling with delight at the thought of what would happen next. His pupils were dilated, almost completely filling the whites of his eyes. He forced my hand through the distorted surface of the window, and all I felt was an extreme cold. That cold was unlike anything I had ever felt before. It felt like submerging my hand in a super-chilled ice bath. It sent agonizing jolts through every nerve in my body. Whatever degree of cold that was, I knew frostbite was only seconds away. I had to summon all my strength to pull my hand free from his grip. I writhed on the floor in pain, cursing the man standing over me. I knew he was reveling in my suffering. He took a moment to watch me struggle to get to my feet before continuing to speak. "The boy belongs with us. Deep down, he knows it. He wants to be with us, and perhaps you do, too. You've seen the other side, detective, and it's always unpleasant. You're all safer with us." "I despise you," I yelled. I lunged for my gun, got to my feet, and fired several more shots at the window with my free hand, but he just stood there, smiling. In a fit of rage, I began to smash large panes of glass with the butt of my gun. As my fury subsided, I noticed that he was gone. All I saw was a large hole and the forest outside the house. I needed a moment to unwind. My heart was pounding in my chest. I sat down on the bed, checked the bruise on my head, and wondered if I needed to go to the hospital to check for a concussion. After a few minutes, I thought I was stable enough to call the chief and explain why the neighbors would likely soon be calling about hearing multiple gunshots. I told him to get dressed and come here, and I would tell him everything that had happened. A deep breath later, I turned back to Lucas and Mrs. Wilson. When I knocked on their door, they only opened it after I reassured them that I wasn't the intruder. The first words out of her mouth were ones I truly wasn't prepared for. "What happened?" she asked, tears streaming down her face. This was probably the hardest part of the night. Lucas had witnessed something truly terrifying, and he knew that I had seen it too. I was the person he was supposed to trust. I was the one who was supposed to stand for truth and honor. I was the one who was supposed to stand by him. Yet, despite all that, I was the one who lied about everything. It was a masked man and several others outside with him, and we had a confrontation. After reviewing some records at work, I truly believe it's a guy we've dealt with before. He uses a device to jam security cameras, and his clothing makes him extremely difficult to see in the dark. That's why I couldn't see him the first time. Look, when the chief arrives, you can talk to him about everything. Complete lies. I hated myself more with every falsehood that escaped my mouth. I truly wanted to tell them the truth, and if it were my decision, I certainly would have. But after my previous encounter, I knew that wasn't my choice. Eventually, the chief arrived on the scene. I handed Mrs. Wilson over to him and the few officers who accompanied him. I recognized them as the two who had entered the abandoned farmhouse with the tall woman. When the chief gave me permission to leave, I looked back at Lucas one last time as I walked out. The boy looked at me with tear-filled eyes and an unmistakable expression on his face. It was an expression I'd seen before, disappointment. The kid had been through too much. Sometimes, all a child needs to heal is validation. They want someone to acknowledge that they believe what they're saying is true, and what I did took away every chance of that. It hurt. In the following days, the mother and son were relocated elsewhere in the state. They were misled into believing there was a dangerous mold growing beneath their house. They were also told a giant sinkhole was forming under the house, jeopardizing the entire property. Mrs. Wilson was led to believe that this couldn't be remedied within a reasonable budget, so it made more sense to move, believing it was also a fresh start for Lucas. She agreed. My chief said he tried to keep in touch with them. From what he heard, there were no reports of anything unusual, which, of course, was great to hear. I even opened a special bottle of wine with Detective Jones one night to celebrate. In the following weeks, things returned to normal. Everything except my personal life. We all go through periods where we feel like we're being watched. That feeling was coming on much stronger than I had ever noticed. It didn't matter if I was home alone, driving, or just walking. I'd always catch myself looking back again, as if hearing something speak or seeing a vague silhouette out of the corner of my eye. This culminated when, after a shower, I was going through my skincare routine in front of the mirror when I distinctly saw a man behind my reflection. I nearly had a heart attack when I realized it was that familiar large face. The man from Lucas's window was staring into my soul. I avoided looking at my reflection in any reflective surface for the next month and a half. Nietzsche once said, "If you gaze long enough into an abyss, the abyss will gaze back into you." I'm not sure he understood how right he was, but that was a statement that carried more weight for me than almost any other. If anyone can, I advise them to avoid that abyss at all costs. The darkness staring back at you will never be worth your curiosity. Stay safe, everyone. Part 3, The Hermit. Robert Evans once said, "There are 3 sides to every story: your side, my side, and the truth." In my line of work, you soon realize that the truth is rarely a purely objective perspective. Think of a bloody brawl stemming from an argument one person claims their actions were self-defense, while the other condemns it as a brutal assault. A video captures a man in a fit of rage, savagely beating another. The case seems closed, and the truth, seemingly recorded in digital footage. But when you look deeper, what do you find? A lifelong friendship, betrayal, simmering tensions, hidden threats, and ultimately, an explosion. Perhaps the assailant truly believed their life was in danger and mistook the slightest movement for an impending blow, or perhaps they simply let anger consume their reason. Or maybe it was a complex blend of both. So what is the objective truth here, and what value does that truth hold when everyone has their own perspective? As a police officer, understanding the nuances of truth is paramount, and understanding the power of those nuances is even more so. Not just when we have to discern whether someone's memory of events is accurate, but also when we need to use small untruths to elicit a specific response. It's something you quickly become accustomed to. For me and my investigations, this has become especially true since the case of what I called the observer concluded. I've been assigned various other cases, many of which were either insignificant or too far beyond our control to do anything more than file a formal report. During this time, Officer Ryan somehow earned the chief's favor, while I floated between real crimes and strange phenomena. As a result, he had the opportunity to join me on some investigations. Once, we even visited a place I could easily call the creepiest amusement park I'd ever set foot in, a place with the peculiar name, Chess's World. To be honest, we only lasted about 10 minutes before we both agreed that leaving the place and reporting that everything was fine was the best option. I don't know if Chess's World still exists, but either way, I'm not the one to tell that story. The important thing here is that Officer Ryan and I spent a considerable amount of time together, and admittedly, the guy started to win me over. Because of that relationship, I specifically requested him for my next case. A local hospital had called about a man who had infiltrated the psychiatric ward. It was alleged that someone had been seen inside this area multiple times. One patient even reported that the man had been sitting on the ceiling. Initially, these reports weren't taken seriously, but when one of the security guards saw a naked man climbing the wall and squeezing into a small ventilation shaft in the ceiling, we were called. Normally, calls like this would be handled by patrol officers. However, when information about this man's strange occurrences was relayed up the chain of command from inhuman, blood-curdling screams to his seeming appearance in locked rooms, my interest was immediately piqued, along with a strange sense of dread. When Officer Ryan and I arrived at the hospital, everything was already prepared. The reasons why we needed to evacuate the floor and bring in multiple officers were thoroughly explained, and when we arrived, we were led through a dimly lit hallway that led to the psychiatric ward. The security guard leading the way called it the old hospital. Apparently, this used to be the main section of the hospital. When the hospital decided to modernize and expand, they built a new section, leaving the old part noticeably neglected. The first sign of this was evident in the cramped elevator we had to use to go down to the main lobby of the psychiatric ward. To be honest, the feeling of descending in an elevator that probably hadn't been maintained in a very long time made me quite nervous. The groaning and screeching of the elevator only added to my anxiety. Officer Ryan made small talk with the security guard as we descended. The guard mentioned that the hospital was storing a large number of oxygen tanks in the old hospital's storage room. He regularly checked to ensure the tanks weren't damaged. During one of his patrols, he recounted seeing the Hermit eating a dead rat. The story made my stomach churn, but hearing the guard find comfort in talking to Ryan helped me temporarily forget the pressure. I always found it interesting how everyone seemed to gravitate towards the guy. But when the elevator doors opened to reveal a lobby that looked like it hadn't changed since the 60s, my stress level skyrocketed. Waiting for us was Detective Evely Jones. Behind her were two patrol officers I often saw accompanying the chief. Detective Jones's light brown hair was neatly tied back. Her dark blue uniform and heavy makeup contrasted with her pale skin and the light freckles on her nose. And, of course, she was frowning. "What took you so long to get here, Smith?" she said with an exasperated tone. "We evacuated this floor because there's a dangerous individual. I hope you're not going to leave me to finish your job and actually help catch him." "Not all of us are track stars, Detective Jones," I joked. "Besides, we seem to have arrived before the universe collapses from heat, so in my opinion, we still have plenty of time to resolve this." "No thanks necessary," she glared at me, then turned to speak to Officer Ryan. "Hey, Officer Ryan, how are you? Have you found a new place for you and your wife yet?" Officer Ryan nodded. "Actually, we have. There's a new development that just finished about 6 miles north. We're planning on moving in there." "Wait, Officer Ryan," I interrupted. "Since when are you two so chummy?" He shrugged. "We just talk sometimes. She's nice." I looked back at Detective Jones with a raised eyebrow and saw a half-smile in return. She then turned to the security guard and said, "Thanks for bringing them down here, Davis. We'll handle the rest. If you want, you can have someone wait outside the elevator on the floor above, but we don't want you guys interfering with anything down here." He nodded and turned back to the elevator, waving goodbye as the doors closed in front of him. "Hold on, she wants them to wait upstairs," I asked. "How are we supposed to get him out of here without them seeing him?" Detective Jones motioned for us to follow her without a word. She led us through a dark hallway that ended with a door with a broken exit sign hanging precariously. It leads out to the back of the hospital. I think we can corner him out here so the hospital staff don't see him, and then. Wait, I said skeptically. This hospital is less than a mile from the main highway, and you want to release him outside. She sighed before continuing. No, assuming we can't kill him, we have a few guys with trucks waiting in the back. Hopefully, we can catch him and take him out of the city into some woods somewhere to release him. We won't have much time. Apparently, the chief has dealt with this guy before, and he's quite the escape artist. The best we can hope for is out of sight, out of mind. Out of sight, out of mind, I scoffed. It's great that we actually care about people. She shrugged. Yeah, I'd like to do more too, but we're not monster hunters. I know, but it still feels empty. Detective Jones went on to explain that this hermit tended to fill any enclosed space when exposed, and that he would likely bolt straight into the empty bed of the truck. She then led us on a tour of the old hospital. There wasn't much to see. Everything was confined to a small floor. We started with the main reception and waiting area. To its right was a sliding door leading to a terrace, and directly in front of it were 3 hallways. The farthest hallway to the left led to patient rooms behind a locked door. The middle hallway contained the security station and a few other rooms, not too far apart. The last hallway was the most interesting. At first glance, all you saw were a few locked doors that you could easily dismiss as simple janitorial closets and a water fountain. Thinking back to the conversation I'd overheard between Officer Ryan and the security guard, the door at the end of the hallway piqued my curiosity the most. Inside, I found several oxygen tanks stacked on top of each other, with various miscellaneous items surrounding them. While oxygen isn't inherently flammable, for those who don't know, it can be incredibly dangerous near combustible materials. Without going too deep into the science, as an oxidizer, it can cause fires to spread much faster. Not to mention, a ruptured pressurized tank can cause immense damage. 10 to 20 tanks could cause a catastrophe. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong about the science, but either way, this certainly wasn't up to OSHA standards. Not only that, but there also appeared to be a small hole in the ceiling, likely where he entered. I snapped a few pictures on my phone. I informed Officer Ryan and Detective Jones of my discovery, but they both largely ignored me. All right, Detective Jones began. Officer Ryan, I want you to stand at. Before she could finish, a voice I assumed belonged to one of the officers assigned to monitor us came over her radio. Heard a loud noise coming from the terrace, and when I investigated, I saw someone sitting outside. We quickly rushed back to the main lobby and found the same officer standing near the terrace door. Detective Jones stepped over to speak with him, but all I could focus on was the figure huddled outside. Despite his large frame, he was gaunt, with a bulging stomach. His head was perhaps twice the size of a normal human head, but most of that seemed to be due to his oversized eyebrows that drooped over his wrinkled face, making him even more menacing with a deep, scowling look from his squinted eyes hidden beneath thin black hair. Yet, despite his intimidating appearance, he seemed mostly human. It was hard not to wonder what all this drama was for. Sure, trespassing is a crime, but evacuating an entire hospital floor and bringing us in here just for a regular guy? It was strange. This case could easily have been handled by a couple of patrol officers. I could feel Officer Ryan sharing the same thought, but Detective Jones, on the other hand, seemed tense. When she finally approached to speak, I almost laughed in her face. "This is the guy, huh?" I said with a smile. "Probably homeless. The man clearly needs help, but we're bringing all this just for him." She wouldn't hear it. "Don't underestimate this man, Smith. I want both of you to be ready to fire immediately." I scoffed. "Are you serious? I've seen a lot of messed up things recently. I understand when there's a threat, but I'm not going to assume he's crazy until I see it clearly. Do you know how bad it would look if we approached an unarmed, normal man with guns just for the egregious crime of sitting? Can you imagine if one of us accidentally shot him?" "Yeah," Officer Ryan chimed in. "You haven't really seen him do anything overly aggressive, right? No reports of threats or him actually attacking anyone. Sure, trespassing is bad, but he's just sitting there. If he goes to the media about 3 police officers pointing guns at him for no good reason, it would be really bad. She shook her head. Listen, I don't. I've been doing this long enough to understand. I understand where you guys are thinking, but I'm telling you, the difference in that moment between drawing your gun and firing could be the line between life and death. If it turns out he's just a normal guy, who's going to believe? No, I almost yelled. We can't set that standard. We are, or at least we should be, better than that. I've heard the stories, but we can't make those assumptions until we have enough information. Everyone was silent for a moment. The tension in the air between Detective Jones and me was palpable. Officer Ryan, in his usual style, tried to lighten the mood. So, 2 against 1? My math is usually terrible, but I'm pretty sure we win, so hooray, no need for guns. All right, Detective Jones replied through clenched teeth before calling over the officer she had spoken to earlier. Officer Murray, get into a position where our friend can't see you. If anything happens, shoot to kill immediately. At least we agreed on that. I took the lead in approaching, hand on my taser. Officer Ryan did the same to my right, while Detective Jones stood to my left, hand near her gun. As we opened the door to the terrace, there was a distinct feeling that we were not welcome. The man didn't move or say a word, but it was as if his very presence was telling us to leave. Truthfully, I felt a slight lump in my throat as I tried to speak to him. Unfortunately, Officer Ryan didn't notice the hostile atmosphere and made the mistake of being the first to communicate. Hey, buddy, we got a call about you being here, and the hospital staff informed us they want you off the premises. If you need us to provide clothes or take you somewhere, we're happy to help. No, the Hermit's guttural voice startled us for a moment. The sound seemed to emanate from deep within his chest, but he didn't seem to exert much effort. I looked over at Detective Jones for a moment and found myself mimicking her. My hand had shifted to a firm grip on my gun. I was starting to realize that maybe he really wasn't human, and that I had made a big mistake by insisting we approach him unarmed. It took a moment for Officer Ryan to regain his composure. He chuckled nervously and continued. Excuse me. Look, we really can't take no for an answer here. If the hospital staff wants you to leave, then you have to go. We really want to cooperate to make this go smoothly. No, his voice boomed again. This is my home. Before I could understand what was happening, he lunged with terrifying speed. One moment he was sitting on the ground, the next he was wrestling on the floor with Officer Ryan, pummeling his face red. Detective Jones had drawn her gun, but I knew she couldn't get a clean shot without risking hitting Officer Ryan. Reacting instinctively, I yelled, "Don't shoot!" while I lunged at the Hermit, tackling him to the concrete floor. Not only was his strength incredible, but his body felt as if it were covered in some kind of oil, making it impossible for me to get a firm grip. I had wrestled in my youth, but I was completely unprepared for this grapple. Eventually, he found a way to get on top, and I could see his massive hands about to strike when a loud bang rang out, then another, then another. Suddenly, I felt a stream of pus pour over my face as the pressure from his body left my chest. I prayed to whatever gods might exist that Detective Jones had killed him. I was not relieved to hear that deep, guttural voice again, ordering us to leave his home immediately. Looking up, I saw him slithering into a ventilation shaft that led back inside the building. Though his presence was still a threat, my immediate attention went to my bloodied partner, lying just a few feet away. I rushed to his side, and the damage was clear: cuts, bruises, missing teeth, and a severely broken nose. "Damn it," I yelled. "Evely, help me get him up." We managed to get Officer Ryan back inside and handed him over to Officer Murray to take him upstairs and get help from the medical staff. Deep down, a sense of rage endlessly surged within me for not being able to accompany him. It was my decision not to use my gun on the Hermit, and because of that stupid decision, Officer Ryan could have permanent brain damage and would likely need plastic surgery. We still had a job to do, but it was hard not to wallow in my own foolishness. Detective Jones was kind enough to give me some space and wait for me to join her. It took a few minutes for me to compose myself. I found her standing outside, smoking a cigarette. "Since when do you smoke?" I asked. She flicked the ash and exhaled a plume of smoke. "I'm not a smoker, at least not often, but the deeper I get into these cases, the more I find myself needing to light one or two to think, or just to cope with, you know?" She turned to me and offered a lighter. I'm trying to quit, so take it. I don't have another one, so as long as you keep it, I can't smoke. I took the gift and leaned against the wall beside her. So, we're going to find that thing and shoot it to pieces, right? She shook her head. I know you want revenge for what it did to Ryan. Believe me, I've been there, but that won't work. What the hell do you mean, it won't work? He was bleeding or gushing like a stuck pig when you shot him. Between us and the officer on the lookout, we had enough rounds to take him down. If that's not enough, we get bigger guns. 2 of us and Officer Ryan need to guard the elevator. Also, I think the shock of the situation made you miss something, Smith. I was how far from him? 20 feet? I shot that bastard 3 times with my handgun, 3 close-range shots. I was there and after the gushing stopped, there were no wounds. This information froze me. I don't understand, he was clearly hurt. How can there be no wounds? She shrugged. Have you ever heard of self-healing fabric? You can stab a hole in it, but it repairs the hole almost instantly. The bullets definitely went in, but you couldn't tell that by looking at him. If you stood up right after 3 empty rounds to the head, how much damage do you think they could cause? I think the only thing a full-on shootout would do is annoy him. We need a real solution. That was hard to hear. I wanted revenge for my friend, and I was convinced that we finally had a way to kill a monster just this once. It took a moment, but I knew I had to resolve myself to a different method. All right, so what do we do? The original plan, she said, placing a hand on my shoulder. I wanted Officer Ryan to man the surveillance station, but since he's not here anymore, I'll have to do it. Keep your radio open, and I'll direct you to his location on the floor. If we can chase him until he gets to the door leading to the trucks, we'll be fine. It's like chasing a fly out a window. Truthfully, I thought it was a terrible plan. I understood the general concept, but playing dangerous hide-and-seek with a super hermit sounded like a high-risk endeavor, and that danger immediately manifested itself when we spotted him standing at the end of the hallway near the surveillance station. I aimed my gun at him and ordered him to freeze. He didn't take his eyes off me as he spoke. You are intruders in my home. Leave or suffer the consequences. I will protect my property. He paused, and I'm not kidding. The bastard began to climb the wall as if gravity meant nothing and squeezed into another ventilation shaft. Clearly breaking the laws of physics didn't bother Detective Jones in the slightest. As soon as he disappeared, she got to work opening the surveillance cameras. When everything was ready, she reiterated the plan. Following her directions, we would lure him out of the building. We knew that bullets could cause him pain, and that threat would likely be enough to funnel him towards the truck. She remarked that this was simple, and at first, I thought perhaps she was right. After a while, we spotted movement in the patient room hallway. This was it. Time for action. As I advanced towards the destination, gun held straight ahead, I couldn't deny a feeling of anxiety that this would be anything but simple. Entering the door, I did a quick sweep. Inside, the patient rooms were open on the right, and at the same time, there was a small kitchen, a small TV, and a nurse's station, all tucked away in a small area on the opposite side, an ugly corridor, but ultimately no one. I don't see anything, I said over the radio. Did he move? No, he's hiding behind the nurse's counter to your left, probably planning an ambush, she replied. I slowly advanced towards the counter, careful to always keep my back to the rooms. My heart pounded in my chest, and sweat began to bead on my forehead. My mind raced with ways this situation could go wrong. As I neared the desk, I took a deep breath and spun towards the desk's entrance, yelling for the ugly bastard to come out. Nothing. Looking around the corner of the nurse's desk, I saw nothing. Just one curious step forward, and he lunged from his hiding spot in the empty counter space and pinned me to the floor. Immediately, I felt a sharp pain in my right shoulder. His gums had detached from his jaw and shot forward like a goblin shark, biting deep into my flesh. My scream of pain only made him bite harder. Luckily, I still had my gun firmly in my left hand and fired a few shots at whatever I could find. The pressure on my shoulder eased, and he recoiled in pain, clutching his stomach. I quickly got up and used my strong shoulder to shove him into an empty room and slammed the door shut behind him. Luckily for me, one of the few things they had upgraded in the old hospital was the door. It appeared to be card-locked. This meant that unless an employee opened the door, he wasn't going anywhere. I hoped this would buy me time to develop a new strategy, but his incessant pounding on the door made it difficult to think. Pound all you want, you won't get out of there unless I want you to, I yelled. Immediately, he went silent. He looked at me for a moment, then pressed his face against the small window on the door to speak. And the only reason you want me out is to try to scare me out of my home, right? What? Your plan, you fool, he said as if stating the obvious. You think you can make me abandon my home? You'll run out of bullets. It will hurt me, yes, but if I stand my ground long enough, you and your little friends won't be able to hurt me. I know I can take the pain, but will you survive if your jaw is torn off? He paused to spit a yellowish fluid onto the glass. I will hunt you first. His threat made me take a step back. He knew all along. We would chase him until we ran out of steam, and then he would attack. Detective Smith, Detective Jones's voice boomed over the radio. I see you've got him contained in there. Look, you need to. He knows something. He knows the plan. We need to try something else. I've got him trapped here, but I. Smith, look down and get out of there now. Confused, I followed her words and saw two bony fingers beginning to slide out from under the door. Soon after, his hand appeared. I didn't have much time to think. I quickly lunged towards the exit and slammed the door shut behind me. Looking back through the window on the door, I could see his arm was almost completely out. 3 options. Pull him out? No, he wouldn't simply follow me out. I could run towards Detective Jones. We could at least hurt him together. But if this guy was a living bullet sponge, we'd both eventually run out of bullets. There was one truly remaining option. The idea of a plan I didn't entirely trust began to form in my head. A quick glance back showed I was running out of time. He was pulling his leg out of the door, and I knew he would lunge straight for me. I turned on my radio. Detective Jones, he's coming your way. He wants revenge for the previous shot. Get to a position outside near the truck. She replied with a simple, Roger that. Just in the nick of time, the guy broke free and was lunging for the door. I quickly darted towards the supply closet. My 3 steps had to equal one of his because I could hear him closing the distance at lightning speed. Despite the pain, I chose to lunge in, pulling the door open, spinning around as I landed, and firing a warning shot towards him, hoping to slow him down. It worked. The bullet whizzed past him, but I knew he didn't want to take unnecessary damage. He ducked behind a water cooler, giving me just enough time to get up, pull out the lighter Detective Jones had given me, and aim my gun at one of these oxygen tanks. Get out here, bastard, now. He slowly stood up and advanced towards me. He growled, and I could see in his eyes that he was incredibly angry. You fool, you've cornered yourself. I'm not afraid of a little fire. I spat on the ground. I don't care about a little fire, but there are countless flammable materials in here, right? What do you think would happen if I shot these oxygen tanks while holding this lighter? Truthfully, I wasn't sure about the veracity of this, but my threat seemed to stop him in his tracks. What do you plan to do? He asked cautiously. Clearly, you're a smart guy, much smarter than the things I've dealt with before. So let me make this clear for you. Oxygen tank plus bullets plus fire equals explosion. And when an explosion happens in an old space filled with flammable materials, I don't know if you can survive a fire explosion, but it doesn't matter because your precious home will be no more. No, he yelled, reaching his hand forward. You'll die too, you won't do this, not to my home. He was partly right. I wouldn't risk harming anyone in the hospital if this crazy plan worked, but that didn't matter as long as he believed I would. I don't care about your home or you killing me or the explosion doing the job. Truthfully, I think I'd rather die this way than endure anything you would do. Plus, it would be much more satisfying to know you'll have nothing after this. I squeezed the trigger a little more. You take one more step, and I swear to the universe I'll. Stop, he yelled. Don't destroy my home. What do you want? Look, I'm a reasonable guy. There are a few newly abandoned homes about 6 miles north. I'm not sure how you'll get there, but they're empty. So let's make a deal. You can't keep this home, but maybe you'll find a new one there. You do that, and we'll leave you alone. He considered my offer. I go there, and you will stay away from my new home. I nodded in reply. Moments passed in silence. The feeling that I would have to adjust my threat seemed to grow clearer with each passing moment, but eventually, after tense minutes that felt like hours, the hermit walked away without a word. I let out a sigh of relief, perhaps the biggest sigh of relief in my life, and collapsed to the ground, clutching my aching shoulder. The pain seemed to be growing stronger. Detective Jones's voice came over the radio. Smith, we saw him come out, but the little bastard scurried down a storm drain on the median. I eventually had to recount my conversation to Detective Jones and the chief. She wasn't happy that I had essentially passed the problem elsewhere, and she was extremely angry that I had changed the plan without notifying her, but ultimately, she was still proud of me. The chief, on the other hand, showed his appreciation for my quick thinking more overtly. This way, we knew exactly where he would be, and we could prepare for his presence, and dealing with him in an empty house seemed much more ideal than dealing with him in a hospital full of people. Despite everything we'd been through, and with many issues still to be resolved, one thing incessantly remained on my mind. As I wrapped things up with the chief and hospital staff, Officer Ryan had his own room, but I wasn't allowed to visit him, at least not officially. I snuck past most of the staff to get to Officer Ryan's room. Those who saw me didn't ask too many questions when they saw my badge. He looked terrible and was on heavy medication, but at least he was conscious. That was a good sign. Officer Ryan, Bari, I began. Look, I'm sorry, buddy, I made a mistake. I should have known better about the danger and been prepared. All he could manage was a weak wheeze. The bandages and swelling made it difficult for him to speak. The words came out slightly muffled. I can only imagine how hard he had to try to find the energy, but he fought through the pain and simply said, "Don't blame yourself, man. You did the right thing." I nodded and leaned down, placing a hand on his shoulder, knowing I should let him rest. I started to leave the room, but a weak call stopped me as I reached the door. "What is it?" I asked, turning back around. "Don't call me Bari, man. It sounds weird." "I was just trying to be respectful, you annoying blonde guy, but all right, Officer Ryan it is," I replied with a smile. He gave me a thumbs up, and knowing he would be okay, I finally left the room. That night was horrible, and I was ready to go home and sleep off the horror. So I was less than thrilled to see a hospital employee running after me in the parking lot. The woman looked to be in her late 20s, perhaps early 30s. She had a small build with dark brown hair. Her badge indicated she was a nurse working in the psychiatric ward, which immediately suggested this would be another situation where someone would ask questions I really didn't want to answer. I didn't even get a chance to say a proper hello before she was standing directly in front of me. "You're one of the police officers who handled the situation with that man earlier, right?" she asked with an accusatory tone. "Yes, I am. What do you need?" She looked at me as if I were insane. "What do I need? Are you serious? You know what happened in there, and you're just going to pretend like nothing did." "I'm not sure what you're referring to, but if you have information you'd like to share, I can give you my." "Bullshit," she yelled, pointing a finger at my face. "You don't think I know about that man in the old hospital? A man who can climb vertical walls and squeeze into spaces so small even a child couldn't fit through? Or his damn voice. Your chief came and said he was just a homeless man living in the building and expected us to believe that. I don't. They didn't believe me when I said I saw him. Do you know how terrifying it is to see that thing staring at you from the end of a hallway, just inside the camera's blind spot, and then disappear when you go for help?" She knew I couldn't convince her that what she had seen was normal by any measure of reality, but even so, I still needed to know exactly where she was going with this. "I agree that what you saw was very strange, ma'am, but I'm sure there will be a logical explanation for all of this. Once he's in custody, we'll eventually find those answers. But what good does it do you to tell me all this?" She scoffed. "What good does it do me? Creating national media attention about a monster lurking in our hospital might give me some comfort, especially if I know the police are lying about what they saw and being questioned by all the major networks. Or you can tell me exactly what the hell is going on." I knew I couldn't lie my way out of this one. The only thing I could think of was to try to deflect the conversation. You know, storing a bunch of unsecured oxygen tanks is certainly an OSHA violation. I think the news would be much more interested in that than some silly monster story. I waved my phone in front of her to emphasize my point, especially with evidence. But this didn't faze her in the slightest. "You think I care? That security guard is just a 19-year-old kid. You don't think I can convince him to pull out the footage from today? Hell, I bet he'd love to be on TV talking about what he saw, and he's not the only one. Yeah, those oxygen tanks look really bad, but what do you think would be bigger news? Why are you pushing this so far? Why do you want to know so badly?" Because, she yelled again, my sister is a patient in the old hospital. What if he hurts her? What if he hurts my coworkers or me? I think as someone directly involved, I deserve to at least know the truth. She paused to take a deep breath. I'll make this easy. You tell me, and I promise not to say a word to anyone else. Just please tell me what's happening. Truthfully, at that moment, I was just too tired. Emotionally drained, physically hurt, and I was just so over the lies. Who was I to hide something like that? Why should I pretend that what we had seen was normal, or that it wasn't waiting for someone to harm? We weren't monster hunters, I understood that, but was telling the truth too much to ask? Or at least my version of the truth, at least this once. That night, I decided to tell her. I made her promise to keep it a secret, but I told her everything. Honestly, I think it helped me more to get it off my chest than anything else, but I like to think we both left in better spirits, or at least with a deeper understanding. She didn't thank me, but she didn't have to. She deserved to hear my truth. Everyone does. And as she walked away, I pondered what I had done. The fact that there was still so much we didn't know, so many more monsters, so many more secrets, so many things hidden just out of our sight. I could only hope that she used that knowledge to protect herself. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to another one of my stories. I only have a few more stories to tell. Hopefully, you'll continue to join me for those final tales. As always, stay safe, everyone. Part 4, Hammerhead. Normally, I start these stories with some kind of profound message about police work, but today, all I can tell you is that life is a bitch. It was a rainy October evening, and I had just transferred back to work in the homicide division after a long break. This was a division I was familiar with and originally loved. However, due to certain previous events, I felt I needed to leave for my mental health. For me, after several years of investigating the most gruesome cases imaginable, oddly enough, murder had become almost meaningless. But more than that, I knew it would provide a much-needed distraction. Personally, I was past the stage where my mind was obsessed with catching killers rather than with the increasing number of monsters appearing out of nowhere. As I drove to the apartment complex, I remembered thinking how a place so full of life could be so focused on death. The way people moved in and around the crime scene, like a swarm of ants, each doing their own job independently, but the collective's ultimate goal was the same: to find out exactly what happened and who was responsible. I had hoped that at this late hour, we would have fewer curious eyes, but as I looked around, I noticed the morbidly curious presence of residents was palpable. It was understandable. People don't see murders every day. They are frightened, curious, and fascinated all at once. It's an event too different from the ordinary lives of most people to not look, but there was still a part of me that wished they would stay indoors and avoid the trauma that would surely emerge later. Seeing a dead body is something you never forget. I scanned the crowd of police and forensics personnel, looking for a familiar face. Luckily, it only took a moment for me to find it, and he smiled and waved as I approached. Officer Ryan stood among several other patrol officers with his trademark smile. The scars left from his encounter with the Hermit were minimal, and his previously crooked nose had been perfectly repaired, good as new. "Detective Smith, how's it going?" he asked as I approached. "Not much, I suppose," I replied with a long yawn. "Mostly just tired because people seemingly can't kill each other during normal working hours." The officer standing next to Ryan looked at me for a moment, an amazed expression on his face, then blurted out, "Smith, you're back in homicide? I thought you quit after what happened." I replied with a forced laugh, "Just a short break, Officer Bailey. I always intended to come back." I glanced past him for a moment to look at the body. "What do we have on the victim?" Officer Ryan sighed and shook his head, motioning for me to follow him. We took a short walk to where the body lay. To call it a bloody mess would still be an understatement. The man's entire face and chest were crushed, large pieces of flesh had been torn from his neck, and his right arm appeared to have been pulverized on the sidewalk. The way this body had been desecrated sent shivers down my spine, and it was hard not to feel nauseous at the sight. "So," Officer Ryan began, "as you can see, we have a case of severe blunt force trauma. The cuts and bruises are consistent with a brawl. So far, no one we've spoken to has seen anything. We have the 911 caller waiting to speak with you, Detective." After being briefed on the situation, I moved closer to examine the body. As mentioned, this was an incredibly brutal attack. Thinking aloud, there seems to be only one logical conclusion here. This has to be personal. No way a stranger would desecrate a body like this unless it was for personal reasons, unless they didn't want the victim identified. But even then, this is excessive. Could he have had something valuable? Officer Ryan suggested. He got into an argument with someone trying to take his stuff, and they did this to distract us. I wasn't convinced. As I checked the victim's pockets, my suspicions seemed confirmed. I don't think so. His wallet and keys are still here, so this can likely rule out a robbery. Opening his wallet, I found an ID belonging to a man named Ernie Garrison, 58 years old. We still needed someone to confirm the body's identity, but now it was very likely we had a face to the name. I called a forensics officer over to bag the items while I continued to examine the body. As I checked his neck and trapezius area, my eyes widened, and I immediately yelled for the crime scene photographer to come over. Embedded deep in the man's flesh were 3 gold teeth. The man I assumed to be Ernie Garrison had only been dead for less than an hour, but the skin and muscle around these teeth had already begun to rot. The photographer's expression mirrored my own, disgust mixed with confusion. Although neither of us had a deep understanding of biology or the human body, we both knew that it couldn't rot that quickly, and it shouldn't rot in just one spot while the rest remained intact. From this moment on, I had a feeling something was truly wrong. Initial thoughts began to form in my head, thoughts I didn't want to confront. Ideas of what kind of abomination could have done this froze me for a moment. Had the tall woman brutally killed this man, or was it something else? As I regained my composure, I simply made a note to my team that we needed to extract those teeth and check with forensics to see if they matched any DNA samples in our database. Just as I finished examining the body, I heard a slight buzzing. Instinctively, I reached for my phone but realized it wasn't mine. It took a moment to pinpoint the source of the sound, but I eventually located a faint blue light emanating from near a trash can. Walking over, I discovered a phone. Immediately, I noticed bloodstains on the casing. Pressing the home button brought me to a wallpaper of a man who looked remarkably like Ernie Garrison, a bit younger, and a dog. A missed call displayed at the top of the notification bar. A quick swipe not only showed me that Mr. Garrison had no passcode, but also a text message from a contact saved as the bastard. The bastard, I said to myself. Is there any chance this is just a random coincidence that he was communicating with someone he clearly had issues with at the exact same time he was murdered? I took the phone to another forensics officer and told her to keep it safe for me back at headquarters. After finishing talking with the other detectives about what I had discovered, it was time for me to meet the 911 caller, Mrs. Eva Brownstein. I found her waiting outside her apartment door. I introduced myself and began by asking about the reason for her 911 call. Initially, her trembling voice indicated she was still trying to cope with the stress. I was watching TV when I heard a loud banging outside. I thought it was construction. I guess I thought one of the downstairs neighbors was doing something, repairs or something. I know it was late and it seemed strange, but I wanted to keep quiet, not interfere in other people's business. The banging continued for a while, and I'm sure Ernie just couldn't take it anymore. Poor man, she shook her head. I heard him yelling that he was going to hit someone and then slammed the door. Next, I heard what sounded like a fight outside. He was screaming and swearing, telling someone to let him go. That's when I called the police, but after I hung up, there was just silence. So you looked outside and saw anything? I asked. She nodded. When everything went quiet, I looked through the window and saw Ernie's body lying there, bloody. No one else was around. And you didn't go out to check if he was alive? You're right, I admitted, unable to argue with her reasoning. Do you know who he went to confront, and do you know anyone who could do this to Ernie? She thought for a moment, but ultimately shook her head. No, I'm not sure who he went to meet. I know he had issues with one of the neighbors, but he never told me who it was. As for who could do this, I can't think of anyone. Ernie was a bit hot-headed, yes, but overall, he was a good person. Besides that neighbor, he never said he had problems with anyone else. So, any friends or relatives we can ask? No, he had no children, wife, or siblings, and his parents passed away long ago. I'm one of the few people he talked to. If there was anyone else, I wouldn't want to say you're lying, but it's hard to believe a man with seemingly no connections was murdered so brutally. but between the phone, the teeth, and the neighbor lead, I felt we had a pretty solid foundation for investigation. As I finished the interview, she added one final detail. I know Ernie was a fighter. He always carried a gold folding knife with his initials engraved on it. When you find whoever did this, I swear they'll have scars from that knife. When I returned to headquarters, the first thing I wanted to see was the phone. I practically flew to the evidence room to retrieve the device, and I felt as excited as a child on Christmas morning at the prospect of viewing its contents. A few other detectives and Officer Ryan had gathered around my desk as I read the text messages, which appeared to be a heated argument between Mr. Garrison and his neighbor, Alan Wung. In summary, they seemed to be arguing about loud banging. Mr. Wung seemingly insisted he wasn't the source of the noise and advised Mr. Garrison not to go outside to investigate. The two continued to argue back and forth, eventually leading to Mr. Garrison going outside to confront whoever was out there. This led us to the current situation. This was a crucial lead. The lab wouldn't have DNA results for a while, but we potentially had a direct witness to who killed Mr. Garrison. If we could identify who was outside at the time, the DNA would just be supplementary to strengthen the case. Either way, it all hinged on Alan Wung's testimony. Finding his apartment after knowing his name was not difficult, nor was it difficult to get him to agree to talk after politely informing him that if he was withholding information related to an active murder case, he would be in serious trouble. A short trip to the precinct helped me begin to assess him in the interrogation room. There were no cuts or bruises on his body, nor any bloodstains. With such a brutal murder, you would certainly expect obvious signs, but one thing was evident. Mr. Wung was very nervous. Even if he wasn't the culprit, he still knew something. Beads of sweat dotted his forehead, and his eyes looked nervously from side to side as if searching for something. "How are you feeling today, Mr. Wung?" I asked, trying to break the tension. He forced a laugh. "A strange question under the circumstances. Can we just get straight to the point?" "All right, I guess. The first thing I want to know is how you know Ernie Garrison." "I do repairs, and one day he asked me to fix his car for him because he thought I'd be cheaper than a regular mechanic." "Okay, so you helped him and then what? Were things fine between you two? Did you talk again after that?" He shrugged. "I guess there was a bit of an argument, you could say, but nothing serious. A man murdered after arguing with his neighbor, a tragic but classic story. The pieces were starting to come together in my head." "And what was that argument about?" "About the labor cost. I'm fair, but he was nickel and diming me. I tried to offer a lower price than elsewhere, but that still wasn't enough. Just because he's my neighbor doesn't mean I'm going to work for free, you know? After threatening to take him to court, he paid, but then he started complaining about everything. Noise, my dog, he said he thought he smelled opium from my apartment. Just a mess. He tried his best to get me out of here." "Sounds like he was a real pain. You must have hated him." "Hate is a strong word. We weren't friends, but I never wished anything bad on him. Just stupid things. Look, I get it. That's fair. The problem here, of course, is that he's dead. So what I want you to do is tell me, in your own words, what you think happened." The shift in mood was sudden. I could hear his feet tapping a steady rhythm, and as he began to speak, his voice choked up. I really don't know anything. I just know he was killed. It's heartbreaking, but I don't have much more to add." "That's hogwash, Mr. Wung, because we know you were the last person to be in contact with Mr. Garrison, and that he came to your residence to speak. Plus the fact that you two clearly had issues, this certainly can't be just a coincidence." Despite his shaking head, I could tell from his eyes that he wanted to say more. "Alan, I'm going to be straight with you. I've already said it. If you're withholding any information, you need to speak up. Right now, you could be facing murder charges if everything comes back to you, and you can choose for me to tell the prosecutor that you were truthful or that you tried to hide everything. Which will you choose?" He scoffed and slammed his hands on the table before pointing directly at me. "Don't do that. I had nothing to do with his death. You don't think I know how serious this is?" He sighed and put his hands on his head, tears starting to fall. "This is crazy. If I'm going to be treated as a murder suspect, the last thing I want to do is tell the truth and look like an idiot." He started to panic. I understood. It was time for me to stand up and give him some time to think. As I walked out the door, I turned back and told him to just tell his truth, no matter how ridiculous it might seem. After 20 minutes alone, he was ready to talk. I had hoped for a confession, perhaps a story of how anger had led him and an accomplice to a gruesome but easily solvable murder, clear and simple case. However, what I got was far more terrifying. Mr. Wang began to tell a story of how he went outside late at night to take out the trash, only to discover what he could only describe as a monster across the street. Apparently, as soon as they made eye contact, this monster lunged towards him, and his only option was to run into his home and hide. He heard banging as the thing tried to break down his door. Mr. Garrison apparently heard the noise and thought it was Mr. Wang. Mr. Wang tried to convince him to stay inside and stay away, but Mr. Garrison wouldn't comply and ended up getting killed. When asked why Mr. Wang didn't simply tell Mr. Garrison about the monster, he just chuckled and said, "You think he would have believed that? I don't even expect the person who trusts me the most in this world to believe that, let alone someone who clearly hates me. He would have gone downstairs no matter what." That truly was a wild story. A story I'm sure most people watching the interview from outside would laugh at. A monster appearing from the shadows, attacking him? Right. But the genuine way he spoke about what he saw, and the genuine fear in his eyes as he recalled those memories, was familiar to me. I was familiar with that demeanor because I had experienced that exact same thing. Our conversation continued for a while after that, but ultimately, I let him go. I informed him that I would keep in touch, but deep down, I knew I would never see him again because he simply wasn't the culprit. I don't know if it was for my own mental health or for the integrity of the legal process, but I needed to cling to the idea that this wasn't yet another monster coming to wreak havoc on society. I needed to scrutinize this and ensure I wasn't dealing with the kind of darkness typically seen from humans. For all intents and purposes, Mr. Wang didn't know what he had seen, and this could easily be the work of a local madman. It took several weeks, but when the DNA results came back on the teeth and other evidence we collected, everything began to look bleak. There wasn't a single match. At the same time, when we did more research into Mr. Wang, we found no traces of his DNA at the crime scene, nor did we find any evidence that he had been in contact with a third party to orchestrate a murder. Furthermore, searches from his home computer at the time of the 911 call indicated he was inside, using his desktop computer around the time of the murder. Even potential security camera footage from the area yielded no results. If Mr. Wang was involved, there was no hard evidence to prove it. Our two best leads were slowly drying up, and with time, Mr. Garrison's case went the way of many previous murders. Cold. Time passed, and with no new leads, we had to try something new. I convinced the chief to hold a press conference and ask the public for any information, hoping that if someone recognized the types of injuries or Ernie Garrison himself, perhaps they could plug in the holes we were missing. Initial tips didn't yield much. Mostly, people suggested completely random names, perhaps a creepy uncle or an ex-boyfriend. We even got a few suggestions that a weird staircase in the woods or cultists were the culprits. To be honest, I didn't know what to think about either of those. I had heard stories about both, and to put it simply, no. I would avoid both of those things. The problem was, we weren't making any new progress, just wasting time chasing dead ends. At least, not until I heard a familiar voice on the phone late one night at work. The woman seemed hesitant to begin speaking. "Hello, is this Detective Smith?" "Yes, it is, and who is calling?" "I never told you my name when we spoke last, but this is Maria Alvarez, the nurse at the old hospital. We spoke in the parking lot after that hole." The words, "old hospital," brought back a flood of memories that sent shivers down my spine. The Hermit's face flashed in my mind, and I reflexively turned towards a ventilation shaft overhead, just to make sure nothing was lurking inside. "Ah, yes, I remember, of course. How are you doing, Ms. Alvarez?" She sighed. "I'm trying to deal with what you told me that day. It's been haunting me a lot lately, and it's given me a different perspective. I don't know, I just feel like the world got a lot scarier overnight." "I'm sorry to hear that, I really am." "It's fine, or at least bearable. Anyway, I saw your press conference, and it just sparked some thoughts, you know? A lot of thoughts about what could have happened to that poor man, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized I might have an idea." "An idea about what?" She was silent for a moment, but I could hear sounds from the other end. Then a small whisper came through. Technically, I shouldn't be sharing this with anyone for patient confidentiality reasons. Not long ago, a man came in late at night with similar injuries, bites with surrounding skin rotting, and severe head and chest trauma. We tried to ask him what happened, but all he would say was that some kind of animal attacked him in the woods. I remember we all thought it was so strange because the bites looked human, and, well, after our conversation about monsters actually existing, I started connecting a few dots. Maybe he was attacked by something similar and he wasn't comfortable talking about it. A potential pattern was forming, and my mind was eager to put the pieces together. And is he still alive? What's his name, and where can I find him? Yes, his name is Leonard Houston. I can send you some details about him, and perhaps he'll be willing to explain more about what happened. Bingo, we finally had a solid lead. I was eager to meet Mr. Houston to investigate this. I really appreciate this, Ms. Alvarez, but before I go, can I ask why you're taking such a risk? Why not just let it go? I don't know, perhaps because you shared the truth with me, and I feel I owe you that truth. That was enough for me. I ended the conversation by letting her know that if she ever needed anything, even just someone to talk to when dark thoughts crept in, I would always be there for her. The next step was to take someone with me to meet this individual. I would have asked another detective to join me under normal circumstances, but this was far from normal. Of all the people I trusted to help me deal with the unusual, one name topped the list: Officer Ryan. He was thrilled to get the call. As soon as we had the information on the individual, we immediately set out to find him. The atmosphere on the way to the scene was electric. We were investigating a murder, a brutal one at that, but we both couldn't stop laughing. As I mentioned before, Ryan had a special influence on everyone he encountered. Even though I was under pressure to find out who or what caused Ernie Garrison's death, all I wanted to talk about with Ryan on the way was the anime he was watching and whether aliens had really ever visited Earth. Over the years, I'd been exposed to many wonderful things thanks to Ryan, but what stood out most was his ability to keep me, and everyone actually, grounded. Without him, I would certainly have gone insane long ago. As we arrived at the dilapidated apartment, I felt strangely calm. Although there was clearly a TV playing inside, we had to knock several times before we heard movement. We eventually decided to yell, "Police!" to get the attention of whoever was inside. The thin, pale man who opened the door was clearly not happy to see us. The smell of cigarette smoke and empty beer cans littered the sofa. "Whatever you guys say I didn't do it because I was busy that night," he said, hands raised as if to assert his innocence. I cleared my throat. "Is Leonard Houston home?" "You're talking to him right now." I glanced quickly behind him and saw he was alone. "Right, good. Mr. Houston, you're not in any trouble. I'm Detective Smith, and this is my partner, Officer Ryan. We're investigating something and think you might be able to help us." He cleared his throat. "You guys think I'm a snitch, huh?" "Not a snitch," Officer Ryan chimed in. "If anything, you'd be a hero. Something horrible happened, and we think you can help us right a wrong." Mr. Houston thought for a moment before inviting us into his home. He offered us a seat on the sofa, but seeing the beer cans and potentially existing mold, we both decided to stand. "So," I began, "I heard from a reliable source that you were once hospitalized with some pretty horrific injuries. What was that about?" "Who told you guys that?" "I mean, yeah, I got pretty messed up hiking at night, probably attacked by some animal or something. Maybe a mangy coyote." "A mangy coyote with human-like teeth that caused the skin around the bites to rot." He shrugged and lit a cigarette. "Probably. Lots of weird stuff out there in the woods." I turned to look at Officer Ryan and saw him mirroring my unamused gaze. Turning back to Leonard Houston, my voice grew more serious. "There's a dead man, Mr. Houston. If you saw something that could help us figure out who or what did that, then I need you to be more honest than to say it was just a mangy coyote." His demeanor changed quickly, and a hidden tension began to surface. "You guys are in my home. If I say I didn't see anything but a coyote, then that's all I saw." "But that's not the truth," I retorted. "You know that's not true. Believe me, I understand what you saw might be very strange, but we really need your help." Some truths aren't meant to be spoken. Frankly, to you gentlemen, I've seen things in my life, but that day, I realized some things are better left forgotten. There's no reason to try to convince someone it wasn't a mangy coyote, so that's what it was. I apologize for not being able to help you, but that's all I have. I gave Officer Ryan another look. This time, he knew it meant I was pleading for him to work his magic. Right on cue, he stepped forward and placed a hand on Mr. Houston's shoulder, pointing at a picture on the wall and asking, "Is that your daughter?" He nodded. "Yeah, that's my daughter. She's turning 6 this month." "She's adorable. I always wanted to have one too. Why isn't she here?" Mr. Houston gave a vague answer about issues with the child's mother, but Officer Ryan knew there was more to it. "Forget the badge for a moment, this is just work," Officer Ryan said, pointing to his uniform. "I'm asking you as a human being. I know you don't know me, but it's still just me. Just two men talking, no judgment. Tell me what's going on." Like clockwork, the Barry Ryan effect happened again, and Mr. Houston began to open up. I listened in silence as the two discussed Mr. Houston's full awareness of his less-than-ideal circumstances and how he ended up there after his initial encounter in the woods. The stress became unbearable. He couldn't work, started drinking heavily, and as a result, his marriage fell apart. His decision to hide the truth stemmed from a fear of ridicule. Even if people believed his story, he was still afraid to bring anyone into the nightmare world he so desperately wanted to escape. This combination of unfortunate events led him to where he was now, a place unfit to see his daughter, even on a limited basis, and perhaps he preferred it that way. Perhaps he wanted to isolate himself in the growing darkness. I couldn't help but feel immense pity for him, and to this day, I hope he found peace. This was exactly the kind of world the chief had envisioned when he pleaded with me to keep everything quiet, a world brimming with fear. Judging by the current evidence, he was absolutely right. The conversation eventually returned to Mr. Houston's daughter. Officer Ryan asked a question that truly touched his heart. "If both of us told you we believed you and were willing to do something, then as a father, wouldn't you want to help us make the world safer for your daughter?" There was a long silence as he tried to gather his thoughts. He lit another cigarette and nodded. For the next half hour, he recounted in gruesome detail what had happened. While walking through the woods at night, he heard a loud banging, as if someone was using a hammer to pound on a tree. He thought about finding the source of the sound, but as the sound grew louder and more aggressive, fear overwhelmed him, and he decided to turn back. He started walking in the opposite direction, but before he had gone far, it felt as if he was attacked by a hurricane, throwing him to the ground in the darkness. He couldn't clearly see the thing standing over him, but he could make out the blurred shape of a humanoid creature with a tall head. He didn't have much time to think about what the hell he was facing, because in the blink of an eye, it lunged, tearing at his flesh and smashing his face. The only way he survived was to pull out his pistol and fire it straight into its body. He heard a pained groan as it recoiled. He knew it was his chance and immediately ran into the night. Eventually, someone found him on the road, but he passed out on the way to the hospital. When he woke up, he remembered a nurse asking him what had happened. He debated whether to tell the truth, but ultimately decided not to. From that moment on, all he told everyone was that he was attacked by a coyote. Both Officer Ryan and I listened intently as he unloaded his haunting experience. Ending the conversation, he provided us with the location of the woods he had walked through and the specific path he had taken when he was attacked. Surprisingly, it was only a few miles from where Ernie Garrison was murdered. As the conversation ended, he started to cry and repeatedly said, "Never go back there." Truthfully, I wasn't sure if it was a warning to himself or to us. We stayed with him until he calmed down, doing our best to reassure him that everything would be all right. Eventually, he regained enough emotional balance for us to thank him for his cooperation. As we walked out the door, we assured him that we would do our best to use this information to make the world a safer place for his daughter. However, he still managed to stop us at the door to say a few final words. "I don't know what you guys plan to do, but if you go looking for a nightmare, you'll certainly find one. Keep yourselves safe out there." We nodded in agreement and continued walking. As we got into the car, the path to solving this case had become clear. The biggest question remaining was whether we were dealing with a human or something else entirely. But one thing was certain, we needed to check out those woods. but before we could even get into the car to discuss the next steps, a call came over the radio. Another murder had occurred, this time on the outskirts of the city. As the details of the case and the victims came over the radio, my heart squeezed and my mind began to waver. A mother and her child were dead, brutally murdered just like Mr. Garrison. A deep rage and sadness filled my entire body, and I could only find the words to reply with a simple, "On my way," over the radio. Without another word, I sped off into the night, heading towards our new destination. When we arrived at the crime scene, police had swarmed the area like ants to a lure. Because the case occurred right on the boundary between two jurisdictions, police from the neighboring city had also arrived, conducting their own investigation. Amidst the dense crowd, one particular face stood out to me. Under any other circumstances, I would have approached him with a smile or a joke to lighten the heavy atmosphere of the scene. But when confronted directly with him, all I could ask with a serious tone was, "What the hell happened, Detective Christian?" Detective Michael Christian looked at me and simply replied, "Ah, Smith, this one is brutal, as if the devil himself did it." He asked Officer Ryan and me to join him inside to examine the bodies. The scene inside was horrific. The first thing to note was that the woman's front door had been broken down. It looked like someone had used a giant club to shatter the wood, creating a hole large enough for a person to squeeze through. We had to be careful not to step on the scattered items as we ventured deeper into the house. Detective Christian offered hypotheses about how this could be a robbery gone wrong, but he wasn't very sure. When we reached the upstairs bedroom and confronted the mutilated bodies of the mother and child, it became clear that this was something much deeper. I won't describe the horrific scene in detail, but the comparison to Ernie Garrison's case was chillingly accurate. I think, Detective Christian began to voice an idea that this could be a personal vendetta someone had deliberately disguised as a random robbery and murder, but I truly started to stop listening after the first sentence. I felt myself drifting into a flood of thoughts. The world seemed to fade into nothingness, and the only things that existed outside of me were the two bodies staring back, asking, "Why? Why couldn't I have solved this sooner? Why did they have to be victims of my ineptitude? Why wasn't I good enough to make a difference for them, to ensure that this world was actually safer for them?" Sweat was beading on my forehead, and I felt as if all the air was slowly being sucked out of the room. Why? I was drowning in a sea of questions with no escape, and then a new voice cut through. I felt a hand on my shoulder, pulling me back to solid ground. Slowly, I began to swim out of my own darkness. "Are you okay, friend?" a gentle voice said. I turned around and saw Officer Ryan with a deeply concerned expression. Detective Christian stood beside him, but all he displayed was a confused look. "Yeah," I replied. "Just need some air." I carefully walked out of the house with Officer Ryan close behind me. I decided to find a quiet spot away from the chaos of the crime scene. Trying to keep my composure was a struggle, and Officer Ryan could easily tell that from my body language. "What's going on, man? You weren't like this at the other crime scene," he asked. "I don't know. Maybe the pressure of everything just caught up to me for a moment. It felt like it was all piling on me at once," I said. He wasn't convinced. "Smith, is there something you're hiding from me?" I looked at him for a moment but remained silent. He sighed. "I really don't know what it is, but this whole situation feels different, you know? Stranger than the other cases we've worked together." He leaned against a nearby tree and turned his gaze towards the forest opposite us. "Did you know my wife is pregnant?" "What? No, I didn't know that. That's amazing, man. Congratulations." "Yeah, I'm really excited about it. I always wanted to be a father, but it made me think a lot." "That's natural, right?" I asked. "Believe me, every soon-to-be father thinks a lot, especially when you do our job. But it's that, man, after encountering the Hermit and our other adventures, I think I've started thinking about my own safety. Being a cop is one thing, but there's a real question to be asked about how far we should go." I raised an eyebrow. "What are you talking about?" He shrugged. "I mean, I want to be there when my child takes their first steps. I want to be there when they say their first word, graduate, get married, and so on. And you know what, man? I want you to be there, too. I want to see our kids laughing and playing together. I want your kids to come to me for advice and vice versa. Buddy, I've seen how hard you work to make sure that Luca's kid was safe." You have fatherly instincts in every fiber of your being, and I'd love to see that in a real setting. But how likely is it that it's going to happen that way if we keep chasing demons? He made a very compelling point. I had no better answer than, probably not very likely. Yeah, you can only escape those situations so many times, he said. Whoever takes this case will conduct their investigation and will probably do a good job of finding the truth, but we know where things are headed, Smith. Overall this time, you've become someone I consider my best friend, besides my wife, of course. I love that woman, man. Clearly, whatever you're dealing with in your personal life is difficult, and I won't force you to talk about it, but please, as a friend, I ask you to carefully consider your limits. He was right. I really needed to reevaluate my limits in the future. I didn't realize how much of a psychological toll all this craziness had taken on me. Officer Ryan's words would profoundly affect me in the future, but right then, I knew I needed to solve this case. Oddly enough, it became easier when Detective Christian approached and announced, "Well, it looks like you guys came all this way for nothing. This case appears to be within our jurisdiction, so we'll be leading the investigation here." I nodded and informed him of the similar case we just had a few weeks ago. I told him we would provide all the information we had and were available to assist in any way possible. He nodded and said he appreciated the help. After he left, I offered to drive Officer Ryan home. On the way back, I told him I truly appreciated him and that his words weren't falling on deaf ears, but I also said that I still needed to find the truth because there were important aspects I needed to clarify. He said he understood and simply warned me to be careful, and that he expected me to return unharmed because, in his words, my kids will need an Uncle DB later. I couldn't help but smile and promised him I would return. The next day after work, I returned to the crime scene. I spent hours talking to everyone I could about what they saw the night before, hoping that someone could point me in the right direction. When I was almost out of new leads, I decided to go back and recheck the neighbors of the murdered family. It turned out I had missed one house. The elderly woman inside introduced herself as Mrs. Watson. When I introduced myself as a detective, she seemed flustered. "Oh, I think I already spoke to the police. They didn't seem too interested in what I had to say." "There have been some new developments in the case, ma'am," I lied. "Could you repeat what you said yesterday for me? What did you see?" She thought for a moment before pointing towards the woods. "It's not so much what I saw, but what I know. I'm pretty sure what happened is a result of that." "Why do you think that?" "Well, my grandson, Boris, he said he shot something in the leg a few weeks ago when it tried to attack him. He didn't know what it was, just that it looked very strange. Something limped out of the woods, and the police weren't interested. I wanted to know more. Someone should have been patrolling this area every night." Sounds like he'd seen the thing before. Is there any chance he knows exactly where they come from? She shook her head. "No, I've heard stories about strange things from there, but he said he truly didn't know what it was, just that it made a horrible groaning sound that he said was almost human-like. I can't be sure, but I swear I heard a strange, human-like groan last night around the time that woman was killed. It's too bad, really." "Yes, it's really too bad. Thank you for your help, Mrs. Watson. If anything new happens, we'll be in touch." With that, I returned to my car. The pieces of the puzzle were now before me. What did I have here? What were the facts? 4 attacks, 3 dead, 1 severely injured. One had driven the creature away. In both cases with survivors, it seemed the commonality was that the things reacted to being shot. I looked over my pistol and knew I had a means of self-defense. Another commonality was that all these cases seemed to occur next to or within a few miles of the woods. Quite a random common factor. From my conversation with Leonard Houston, I knew exactly which trail to watch out for. However, there was still a chance that the encounter on that trail was just a coincidence. Looking at the map on my phone, I saw that the trail entrance was just north of where Ernie Garrison was murdered. Assuming you walked in a straight line, you would arrive at the apartment complex. Head south, and you would do the same with the mother and her child. Which meant that even if the trail entrance wasn't the exact point of origin for these things, it was probably very close. Finally, I had a lead. I had thought about asking Officer Ryan or Detective Jones to accompany me on this expedition into the wild woods, or I could pretend to have a lead that the killer was hiding in the woods to get some additional support. We could go in there together and burn the woods down with a barrage of bullets. If you want to call me crazy or irresponsible for my upcoming actions, I fully respect your opinion, but I decided I couldn't do that. I certainly didn't want to put Officer Ryan or Detective Jones in danger where they could be ambushed in the darkness by some abominable things no one knew about. And if I called for backup, I would have to consider how many police officers would know the truth. Not only would the chief be unhappy, but what Leonard Houston and Maria Alvarez had gone through still haunted me. They survived those encounters, one even unharmed, but the mental scars of knowing there are things out there, the awareness that you are living in a nightmare world where if one monster doesn't get you, another will that destroys a person's psyche. In Mr. Houston's case, it truly destroyed his life. How could I willingly do that to someone else? That didn't feel right. I understand if you disagree with my reasoning, but that's how I felt. That's how I still feel. In my mind, I was doing the right thing. For the next month, every day after work, I drove around the wooded area and walked the trail Mr. Houston had taken when he was attacked. Everything else in my life became secondary, and I committed to doing this until the problem was resolved. One wet and muddy night, I stopped to rest on the trail. The physical exhaustion from this routine was slowly catching up to me. For a moment, I heard a sound that seemed to be a combination of a groan and a whine, and I heard it clearly enough to know it was somewhere in front of me. I grabbed my flashlight and shone the light forward, but I couldn't see far through the trees. Quickly, the sound shifted to my left. This time, there was a distinct noise accompanied by swearing. In my mind, I unholstered my pistol in my hand, not the light, and aimed straight to my left. I waited in silence, hoping that whatever it was would appear and confront me. And yet, nothing happened. I waited for moments to turn into minutes, and still nothing. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I sat back down and tried to control my breathing, telling myself that this was just normal forest sounds, probably just a small animal passing through. But as soon as I felt comfortable again, another deep, human-like groan erupted towards me from the left, this time followed by quick footsteps advancing towards me. I jumped to my feet, hoping it wouldn't notice my change in direction. I rolled to one side and ran behind what looked like the blurred shape of a pair of trees. I could hear its footsteps trampling around, trying to find me. It let out another disgusted groan before stopping in one spot and falling silent again. Fear began to consume my body. I felt an urge to run from this place immediately and never look back to see what the hell was out there. It took a lot of strength in me to resist that primal instinct. I couldn't be sure, but I thought it was waiting for me to move again. If this creature operated at night, it certainly had excellent hearing. I knew that if I was going to act, I needed to act fast and decisively, but at the same time, it was pitch black outside. Plus, if I wanted to act, I would need to shine my flashlight on it to know where to aim, which could also reveal my position, which meant the shots I fired had to be perfect. Otherwise, it would reach me, and that would be it. I switched off the safety and loaded my gun. I took a deep breath and counted silently. 1, 2, 3. I swung my flashlight towards where I thought it last stood and illuminated the hideous creature. I couldn't say for sure if it was human or something in between. It had a human-like body, but twisted and missing both arms. Yet it had two furry, human-like hands where its legs should have been. Looking up further, I saw it had one saggy breast, while the other side of its chest seemed flatter with ribs protruding under its pale skin. But the worst feature was that damned head. A massive head, perhaps 2 feet tall, and extremely bulbous with scraggly clumps of hair on either side. Its mouth was agape, revealing swollen gums and a row of yellowish teeth. As far as I could tell, this creature was also completely blind, as it had no discernible eyes, but that didn't stop it from shuffling towards me, simultaneously letting out another groan. I didn't even let it get close. As soon as it started to advance towards me, I fired continuously at it. 1 shot to the head seemed to stun it. 2 shots and it began to stumble, wobbling on its weakened legs. From there, I continued to fire again and again until it lay motionless on the ground. Silence enveloped me. I let out a sigh of relief. I did it asterisk, I thought to myself, but something felt off. I walked over to the body and shone my flashlight on both legs. No gunshot wounds or signs of healing. Curious, I flipped the body over and examined its torso and found a scar from a gunshot wound that looked like a bullet wound to the abdomen. This was definitely the thing Leonard Houston had encountered, not the thing Boris had shot, which meant there was still at least one more creature out there. But how could I find it? I shone my flashlight towards where it had originally appeared. Walking towards it, I saw a small path, or perhaps more accurately, a trail created by the creature through the undergrowth. Its hand-like feet had left clear marks on the muddy ground, so I decided to follow it. Eventually, the path led to a large culvert, wide enough to pass through, but partially submerged in water. I don't believe in an afterlife, but standing before this entrance, I felt as if I was confronting a tunnel leading to hell. Every cell in my body told me to turn back and never return here, but deep down, I knew this was exactly where I needed to go. Before entering, I searched around for the thickest stick I could find and gripped it as a makeshift blunt weapon. Returning to the entrance, I took a deep breath, reloaded my gun, held my flashlight out front, and stepped into the tunnel. As I ventured deeper, my anxiety grew. Every small sound made my heart pound faster. Every vague shape made me jump back in fear. At one point, I thought I saw a human body face down in the water. As I rushed to check the naked man, I was stunned to realize it wasn't a man. In my hands was the rotting corpse of the Hermit. His head had been partially eaten, and all the flesh inside was slowly decaying. It was a horrific sight, but ultimately, I supposed monsters aren't friendly with each other. I dropped the body back into the murky water and spat on it before leaving, continuing my journey. I could feel that it would end soon. I thought about the events that had led me to this moment. Everything that had forced me to become the kind of person who needed to go out and do the impossible. Officer Ryan's words echoed in my head. How far do you want to take this? Think about your limits. As I advanced, I truly began to wonder why those limits had caused me such distress. After it was all over, I needed to do some serious soul-searching. A familiar groan cut through my thoughts. I stood still and took a slow, deep breath. I took small steps forward, and then the shape of a creature appeared before me. As I got closer, I saw it resembled the one I had seen before, though slightly taller with a more masculine chest, a thicker frame, clear black eyes, and more hair growing from the sides of its grotesque head. It also clearly had flesh torn from its legs and appeared to have a yellow pocket knife embedded in its side. No, this was it. The creature responsible for this entire journey. It roared at me, splashing the murky water with its hairy legs, but I didn't move. Seeing me unmoving, it tried to intimidate me further, puffing out its chest and making its fur stand on end. But I wouldn't be swayed. I was here to end this, and it quickly realized that. In response, it did a strange thing. It stopped, spat, turned around, and began to limp towards the creature. It leaped into the air and slammed the stick into the back of its head. The blow didn't cause any damage, but the impact easily knocked it to the ground. It writhed on the ground, trying to fight back. Quickly, I pulled out my pistol and fired into its back. It screamed in pain, but I didn't care. With another shot to the spine, with another shot to its injured leg, with another shot to its back, I boiled over, thinking about what this thing had done to Ernie, Garrison, and Boris, what it could have done to others, and especially what it had done to an innocent mother and her child. My rage began to consume me. I stood over it and emptied my gun into its head, not stopping until I heard the click of an empty firearm. But I didn't stop there. I flipped the body over, used the butt of my gun, and smashed the creature's face, only stopping when I couldn't strike anymore. And then, silence. I gasped for air. I looked at what I had done, scrutinizing the creature for several minutes, just staring. I didn't know what to think about how I felt. The rage had dissipated, but I felt empty. I had killed the creature, potentially saving many lives, but still, nothing had changed. It didn't bring Ernie Garrison or that young family back to life. Leonard Houston would still be haunted. There was something about this that felt hollow. Eventually, I stood up and began to turn back to leave. But then another sound echoed from deeper within the tunnel. Damn it, I muttered to myself. Please don't tell me there's another one. I picked up the remainder of the stick and shone my light forward. I carefully advanced in the direction of the sound until I reached the source. I almost vomited at the sight of 5 tiny, pinkish-gray creatures, miniature versions of the 2 monsters I had killed, lying in a nest of rotting flesh. They were breeding. I couldn't let these young ones have a chance to become as dangerous as their parents. With what little weapon I had left, I did what needed to be done to end this lineage. Finally, it was done. I trudged back to my car. I can't tell you what was going through my head. I honestly think my mind was just blank. No feeling of triumph, just emptiness. My only thought was how to get out of this damn forest. When I reached my car, I felt an intense euphoria, unlike anything I had ever experienced in my life. I sat there for half an hour, luxuriating in the warmth of the heater and the comfort of the seat. Finally, I mustered the courage to call the chief and tell him everything. I told him where to find the bodies and that he could do whatever was necessary, but I wouldn't be there to see it through. I drove straight home and took the best hot shower of my life. 20 minutes later, I changed into clean clothes and went to the only place I knew I needed to be, the local bar. The bartender looked at me with sympathetic eyes as I sat down and ordered a whiskey and a cider. I was sure she'd seen all kinds of people during her time working and probably could recognize those in distress from a mile away. When she offered me another whiskey on the house, it only solidified that she knew I was going through a tough time. That night, I just wanted to do my best to forget everything. 2 whiskeys in, and I was well on my way to oblivion. But as I was about to let the intoxication take over, I heard a familiar voice cut through my hazy thoughts. "Smith, what are you doing here?" I turned and saw a familiar face looking at me with a wide smile, Detective Jones. Her face was flushed, and I could tell she'd had a few drinks already. "Detective, Evely, what a coincidence running into you here," I quipped. She laughed and walked over, sitting next to me. "Hope you don't mind me using you to get away from these drunk guys trying to flirt," she winked. I chuckled. "No problem, I never took you for the bar-hopping type. I like to dress up and come here sometimes on Fridays, but I've never seen you here before. What's up? And you're a cider drinker? That explains a lot." I shook my head. I don't usually drink alone, but today was a rough night, to say the least. Besides, why are you calling me by my last name in a bar? A little inappropriate, isn't it?" She shrugged. "I don't know, to be honest. I call you Smith so much I forgot what your first name is." I giggled. "DB Dree. I know it's not a common name, but my mom is Nigerian and my dad is from Birmingham. My mom wanted to take his last name, but they both wanted to keep a connection to the family's African roots through me, so a Nigerian first and middle name combined with an American last name. But growing up, my friends just called me Dree." She leaned in closer. I could see genuine interest in her eyes. "Oh, that's interesting. There's a whole story behind your name." I shrugged. I guess so, right? I apologize, this is different. Usually, we're all about joking around, playful banter, but still banter, and now you're here asking about my name. This is truly an unexpected change of pace." She leaned back a bit and nodded. "Look, I know this is different, and I know that usually I'm very clingy with you. I swear I'm not always like that. In fact, most of the time, I'm the complete opposite. Certain circumstances have made work one of the few places I can keep my mind busy, away from life, and I became a little too intense. This piqued my curiosity. Taking another sip of cider, I asked her about what was going on. Initially, she hesitated, but with a little encouragement, I got her to open up, and it was a lot. In summary, her father was a police officer, and not a good one. Not in the sense that he was bad at his job, but in the sense that he wasn't a good person at his job. He was corrupt and power-hungry, the kind of bad apple that sullies any remaining shred of justice that badge holds, and at home, he was no better. Verbal abuse, high expectations, and a cold, distant relationship she would never forgive. She wanted to be better than him. She wanted to be one of the good ones, and at least in her mind, she wanted to do something to atone for her father's mistakes. She threw herself into her work, ensuring everything was done the right way. All was good. She rose through the ranks, became a police star, and lived her dream until it came to her home life. She had once been married to a man she thought was perfect in every way, a man she thought she could trust until she caught him in bed with someone else. Blame was thrown back and forth, arguments every night. Her fault for being too dedicated to her work, his fault for not wanting children so she would have a reason to slow down. Divorce papers were filed. Deep depression followed. The only thing left was work, which was now an escape from thoughts of him. It was heartbreaking to hear. I tried to offer my condolences, but she insisted there was no need. Jones was a true warrior. From a difficult childhood to now, she was determined to find a way to better her situation and live the good life she always wanted. However, what happened next was a question that stunned me. "What about you? I heard you left homicide before I got there and now you're back. What happened?" I could give a bland answer about mysterious circumstances or simply a desire to do something different, but Jones had spent so long unburdening herself to me. In that moment, I couldn't help but recall my conversation with Maria Alvarez, truth deserves truth. And so I told her. I told her about the night my wife and young son were murdered at home while I was away. I was at work and returned to find them dead together in the master bedroom. Of course, the police were called. Reassurances that we would find whoever did it were given. I drove around the entire district looking for clues somewhere, anywhere. I followed every possible lead. I dug through dead ends. I double-checked, triple-checked every piece of information, hoping I could find who killed my beautiful family and put a bullet between his eyes. Ultimately, I never found him. The case remains cold to this day. All we had was a blurry footage of a man leaving the scene. He was only on camera for a few seconds, but I spent countless hours watching the footage over and over, hoping each time to see something new, something relevant, but I never did. After that, I left homicide because I couldn't face seeing bodies and constantly being traumatized every time I thought of my family. Jones was silent. "I didn't know, I'm so sorry," she said. I told her it was okay. I had been through a lot of personal growth trying to get past it. It never truly leaves you, nor should it, but I was making progress. For the next few hours, we bonded over our pain, drinking together. We started by talking about the past, then personal interests, movies, music, politics, space. She even told me about a psychedelic experience she had while visiting family in Sweden. Officer Ryan had mentioned it before, but now it was clear. She truly was a very cool person. Eventually, like all good things, our conversation had to end. I was exhausted, and the alcohol was telling me I needed to go to sleep, but before I left, she mentioned that her family owned a cabin a few hours' drive away. Originally, she was supposed to go with a few friends, but plans changed, and then she asked if I wanted to go instead. I told her I'd love to. From there, I walked out into the cold night air. On my way home, I just had time to reflect on everything, and with a smile on my face, I finally let my mind wander. As always, stay safe, everyone. Part 5, Sounds of Nature. In all professions that demand caution and dedication, the work of a police officer always stands at the forefront. We are not simply decision makers. We must also confront the consequences of those decisions for a lifetime. Not everyone can bear this burden. We have witnessed countless times how unprepared individuals crumble when faced with stressful and tragic situations, which are often unavoidable. You must accept the reality that the decisions you make will forever be etched in your memory. They are not just fleeting impressions, but deep, lasting scars that accumulate over time, and sometimes they appear so quickly that you don't even realize it. As the years pass, you must decide for yourself when enough is enough. But the most frightening thing is not just the decisions you make for others, but the decisions you make for yourself. They have no less impact, perhaps even more profoundly. Detective Jones and I sat across from the chief in his office. This scene had become familiar in recent months, as both of us, despite being his most trusted officers, could hardly deny that there was something special when we worked together. After the incident involving the Hammerhead creatures, a human level of understanding had developed between Detective Jones and me. From that, a strange but strong connection had formed between us. It's interesting to look back and realize that sometimes, it's vulnerability itself that draws people closer. "So," the chief began, "you two are taking leave this week, right?" "Yes," Detective Jones replied. "We're heading north, staying in a cabin as discussed." The chief looked at us for a moment, chewing on his toothpick, then turned to me. "Smith, do you know about the family that went missing in the woods near your cabin? A family, parents, grandparents, and 2 children had mysteriously disappeared on a weekend camping trip." His question caught me a little off guard. "No, I don't think I've heard about that specifically, but there must be a lot of people who go missing in the woods every year, right?" He nodded. "Yes, but this family was particularly notable. They knew the woods very well. The father was a park ranger, the mother was a biologist. Even the grandparents were botanists, and both children were excellent scouts. If anyone could survive an unfortunate camping trip, it would have been them. Even so, the number of missing persons in that area has become more alarming than ever." Turning to Detective Jones, the chief asked, "Detective Jones, do you know Chief Cartagena?" "Yes, sir," she replied. "He's one of the best police chiefs I've ever known." "Indeed," the chief said. "Luckily, he manages the area where your cabin is located. I think if you two could do a little reconnaissance while you're there, it would help him immensely. Not an official investigation, of course. Perhaps just ask a few questions from the locals and report back if anything unusual happens. I tried to keep calm, but a sense of exasperation with the chief grew. We were about to go on vacation to escape the stresses of police work and monsters, and he wanted us to use our time off to investigate further. Wait, I interjected. With all due respect, if that's Chief Cartagena's jurisdiction, then that's his job, right? Not only do we not have jurisdiction in that area, but it's also not our responsibility to solve their problems. His people should be investigating this if it's a major concern. Why not cordon off the entire forest? I couldn't tell if the chief's expression was annoyed or respectful of my objection. He took out his toothpick and made a gesture as if exhaling non-existent smoke. You can't cordon off hundreds of square miles of land. People will find a way into the woods no matter what you do. I understand where you're coming from, Smith, but believe me, Chief Cartagena has handled the missing persons issue as best he can. His people are still patrolling regularly and pursuing every lead. I know it's not your job, and you're not obligated to do this, but he thinks an outside pair of eyes and ears could help. I would really appreciate your cooperation. I was about to say that we wanted to enjoy our vacation, but Detective Jones was quicker than me and promised that we would ask a few questions and keep an eye out for anything suspicious. After leaving the office, I told Detective Jones that I was not happy with how that was handled. She apologized and said that we would keep police work to a minimum. As much as she wanted to please the chief, she also wanted to enjoy our time together. She promised that this small inconvenience wouldn't affect our trip. Reluctantly, I agreed to follow her lead. A week passed, and finally we were on our way. The drive north was probably one of the best parts of the trip. The worries about our vacation turning into work faded as we immersed ourselves in conversation, laughter, and singing along to the music of Odyssey and High Pack. After about 4 or 5 hours of driving, Detective Jones turned into a small diner in a small town. As soon as we walked in, it was clear we stood out. Every pair of eyes in the restaurant turned towards us. I tried to wave friendly to a family sitting opposite us, but they just glanced at me with annoyed looks and returned to their meal. Feeling a little offended, I thought it best to try and ignore it. Luckily, we weren't bothered much while eating, paying, and leaving the restaurant until we saw a man in an apron admiring our car. "Hey," I yelled from across the parking lot, "is there something interesting about our car?" The man turned around and smiled friendly. On his apron was the name of the restaurant and a name tag that read Ariel Head Chef. "Oh, hello, folks," he said kindly as he walked towards us. He extended his hand and I cautiously shook it. "You seem a little too comfortable gawking at our car," Detective Jones said, crossing her arms. He looked at the car for a moment, then back at us, waving his hand. "I swear it's nothing, just a nice car. We don't see many cars like this around here, so when I'm on break, I just like to take a closer look. You two don't exactly look like locals either. I'm guessing you're visiting, right?" "That's right," I replied. "Look, if this is some ploy to slash our tires and drag us into some place in the mountains where you keep other people tied up, I just want to let you know we have guns." He chuckled at the scenario I painted. "I'm not sure what Boris is, but you have quite an imagination. Truthfully, I'm a northerner, so I'm not used to violence. I try to bring Canadian friendliness to my restaurant here." "What about your customers?" Detective Jones asked. "They didn't seem very friendly." Ariel shrugged. "It's not that they're not friendly. We've had a lot of problems lately. People used to say they loved our food and chatting with the locals. They always came back when they left town, but this year, it hasn't happened once. I think now when new people come, it's just a bit of morbid curiosity, I guess." "I've heard about the disappearances," I interjected. "Do you know anything about them?" He shook his head. "Sorry, I honestly wish I did. Everyone in town is really scared to set foot in the woods. We've come up with this saying, 'The trees are watching you, so consider that.'" He chuckled nervously. "Anyway, I'm rambling, just hoping you guys stay safe out there." With that, he turned back inside the restaurant. Despite the ominous farewell, it didn't provide much information. However, when I looked at Detective Jones, I saw she was lost in thought, just like when I had a new case. I asked her if she was okay, and she insisted she was, not wanting to overthink the encounter. we decided to leave. As soon as we got in the car, a text message appeared on my phone from the chief, and it read, "Spoke with Chief Cartagena today. A hiker's family reported she didn't come home. The kid is only 18. We need to look into this." A loud groan escaped me. Of course, I wanted to help, but it seemed the atmosphere was shifting with every mile we drove, pulling us deeper and deeper into a situation we hadn't come here to face. What was supposed to be a fun vacation quickly turned into something much more haunting. Frustrated with how things were going, I didn't say much as we drove. Noticing the change in mood, Detective Jones suddenly turned right at the next intersection. According to my directions, we weren't going the right way. When I tried to point this out, she told me to be quiet and said she didn't want to ruin the surprise. 30 minutes later, we stopped in front of an average-looking house on the edge of the woods, and Detective Jones told me to get out. The overgrown foliage around it added to the rustic feel of the house. Confused, I asked, "What are we doing here?" As I got out, she met me at my side of the car and, with a wide smile on her face, said, "We're going to drink and hear some interesting stories here." I asked, "Did I miss something? Aren't we supposed to be going to the cabin?" She chuckled as she walked to the door and knocked. "Trust me, Mr. Oak is a dear family friend. I've visited him every time I've come here since I was a kid." Still confused, I looked at her with a raised eyebrow and crossed arms. "I'm game, but it seems a little out of the blue, doesn't it?" Before answering my question, she knocked on the door again. "Sure, but Mr. Oak is a lot of fun. He tells great stories, and since he used to be a bartender, he makes the best drinks. I thought we could stay here, mix a few drinks, and have some fun. Maybe get back on the road tomorrow since we've been driving all day." "If he opens the door this century," I replied, a hint of anxiety creeping onto her face as she went to knock again. The door creaked open before her hand could reach it, but the person standing on the other side was certainly not the older man Detective Jones had described. The woman looked back at us, seemingly in her mid-20s. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she had the eyes of someone who hadn't slept in a long time. Immediately, Detective Jones switched into police mode and raised her hands as if to reach for her gun before firing a barrage of questions at the woman, most notably, who she was and why she was in Mr. Oak's house. Completely unfazed by the confrontation, the young woman yawned and replied casually, "I'm Amelia. My grandpa hasn't been here since the beginning of the year. I'm just watching the place." Realizing she was just a relative, Detective Jones relaxed her posture, but something in her tone implied she still didn't trust this self-proclaimed niece. "Oh," she said, putting her hands on her hips. "Sorry to scare you. I'm a family friend. I didn't know Mr. Oak was gone. You said since the beginning of the year. Do you know exactly when he left?" Amelia thought for a moment and replied indifferently, "February. Couldn't have been much later. He left a note saying he was going to be doing a lot of traveling." Detective Jones considered this for a moment and motioned for me to approach them. "Interesting. Do you know where your grandpa is?" She shook her head. "No, he hasn't been back since he left, but I'm sure he's fine, like everyone else." That statement caught my attention. Wait, like everyone else? Who specifically is everyone else? Her entire demeanor changed after my question. Her eyes immediately darted towards the woods behind us. A nervous smile crept onto her face, and her voice betrayed a slight unease. "Oh, I just meant like everyone in general. My grandpa is a tough guy. He told me he was fine a few days ago." I wanted to ask more, but Detective Jones stopped me before I could ask any further questions and interjected. "My mistake, then. Sorry to bother you. We'll be leaving now." Without another word, we left. The hasty departure shocked me. We had a direct connection to the disappearances, a connection that could lead to interesting further information, and yet Detective Jones, famously tough, wanted to brush off the visit. The drive from Mr. Oak's house to the cabin was a few more hours, and for half that time, I tried to figure out why she hadn't continued the investigation, but she wouldn't say anything. When we arrived, I intended to press the issue further, but my attention was immediately captivated by the beauty of the surrounding nature. The lush green forests, rolling hills, and vast wilderness were truly breathtaking. The cabin had a charming, modern exterior. It was large enough to accommodate a family, but still retained a cozy feel, not overwhelmed by its surroundings. A small lake lay adjacent, and a fire pit was just a few steps away. This is amazing, DB, I said. All of this is just for us. Detective Jones nodded in agreement. Yeah, just us, nature, and whatever abominations are preying on our visiting guests. We don't know there are monsters, I said. The truth is, this forest is vast. It's easy for people to get lost. I also wouldn't rule out the possibility that some kind of predator has realized that hunting humans is easier than hunting deer. She shrugged and sat on the bed. I hope you're right. It's just that too many strange things have happened since we got here. In all my years in this profession, that usually means something. Didn't you tell the chief you would look into this? The shift in her demeanor suggested my question was interpreted in a way I hadn't intended. Don't do that, she snapped. All I want is for us to be able to be here together. Pleasing the chief was just the quickest way to make that happen. Plus, I still ultimately feel a bit of a responsibility to my job. I raised my hands, trying to explain that I meant absolutely no offense. It was just that she seemed to truly want to embrace the challenge of solving this problem, and that was a quality I admired. Detective Jones let out a long sigh and apologized for getting angry so quickly. She explained that she was very stressed trying to balance her loyalty to her job with her genuine desire to progress our personal relationship. It was a feeling I could completely empathize with. I assured her that her approach was fine. I also wanted to spend time with her, and we agreed that we would take things as they came. Of course, we would try to enjoy the beautiful scenery, but if anything strange happened, we would be ready to face it. We spent the rest of the day exploring the surrounding woods, telling stories around a campfire, and then settling in for the night. Lying together in bed, we made plans for tomorrow, to hike to a high point overlooking the entire vast forest. Ideally, we would be there, then return, make some food, practice shooting with the guns she had here, and finally relax by the lake. Everything seemed set for a perfect day, and the next morning, everything was going according to plan. We prepared breakfast, packed our things, and set off. The hiking trail was much harder than I expected. Detective Jones, who was an avid runner and fitness enthusiast, was kind enough to slow down so I could keep up. When we reached the summit, I couldn't believe my eyes. The scene before us was far different from anything I usually saw. Rows of lush green trees, like a mighty army, stretched as far as the eye could see. The majestic hills before us promised unexplored ecosystems waiting to be discovered. The nearby lake shimmered like crystals as the sun shone down on its surface. It was truly paradise, and what made it magical was being here with Detective Jones. Her eyes showed a deep appreciation for what we had the opportunity to witness. For a long time, I felt as if much of my time was spent seeing the worst of humanity or the most terrifying of the supernatural. With each passing case, I could feel the increasing stress and my sanity slowly being drained. But for the first time in a long time, this world suddenly felt right. It offered peace. After about an hour, hunger drove us back to the cabin. I couldn't pinpoint what or why, but something told me this peaceful moment would be the last of the trip. I didn't want to scare Detective Jones, so I kept silent, hoping I was simply being paranoid. But as we returned to the final stretch of the trail and saw the cabin appear before us, my fears were confirmed. There was a woman sitting on the porch, huddled in a fetal position. Instinctively, I pulled out the knife from my pocket, and Detective Jones did the same. We slowly approached the person. "Hey," I yelled, "this is private property. You need to identify yourself." The woman on the porch looked up at us, and I immediately recognized her. "Amelia," Detective Jones yelled in disbelief. "Oh my God, how did you get here? Why are you here?" Before I could stop her, Detective Jones ran to the young girl and began to help her inside the house. Don't get me wrong, I understood why Detective Jones was eager to help the granddaughter of a childhood friend, but clearly, something about this was very unusual. By the time I caught up to them, Amelia was wrapped in a blanket on the sofa and sobbing uncontrollably. We tried to get Amelia to explain what had happened and how she ended up at the cabin, but what she said made no sense. She mumbled about being led here before completely panicking. She needed time to calm down. Detective Jones and I decided to take a walk around the lake to give her space. When we were out of earshot, I looked Detective Jones straight in the eye and said, "Don't tell me you don't find this strange." She felt offended by my words. "Of course I find this strange. You think I find this normal." No, it's just that I'm not sure we should have let her in so quickly. You and I have seen enough to understand that this is bordering on terrifying. DB, I understand, man. I don't even understand how she got here. Forget not knowing the way here, but I don't see any other cars. Walking this road to get here is a tough day for anyone, but Mr. Oak is like family to me. If there's a chance his daughter is in trouble, I need to be there for her, even if it's in strange circumstances. No part of me liked that answer, and frankly, if it were up to me, I'm not sure I would have let her stay, but ultimately, it wasn't my decision. This was Detective Jones's cabin, and I needed to respect and trust her. Without arguing, I simply replied, "All right then." Soon after, we were back inside the house and found Amelia had calmed down a bit. I made coffee for all three of us and asked if she was willing to talk about what had happened. She nodded reluctantly and wiped away the remaining tears. She tried to look Detective Jones in the eye before speaking, but ultimately turned her gaze down and began to cry again, yelling, "I'm sorry. I lied. Oh my God." Confused, Detective Jones knelt down and put her hand on the young girl. "What did you lie about? What are you saying?" "Mr. Oak never went traveling. He's missing." "What?" Detective Jones almost yelled as she stood up. "Where and when did he go missing?" "Earlier this year. He went into the woods and never came back." "Did you report it to the police?" I interjected. "Of course," Amelia replied, "but they'll never find him. They can search every inch of that forest and it won't matter." My brain immediately switched back to detective mode and my questions grew more serious. "How can you be so sure they'll never find him?" For a brief moment, she looked at me strangely, her brow furrowed, as if she expected me to know the answer to my own question. "Because they don't know what to look for. It's not her," she sighed. "He's different now." "Amelia," Detective Jones began, "what do you mean by different, and do you know if your grandpa is safe?" Tears welled up in her eyes again, but strangely, there was a smile too. "I know for a fact that he's doing very well. He's doing better than ever." Detective Jones and I exchanged confused glances. Nothing made sense in that brief moment. Detective Jones seemed to read my mind because she asked a question that was also on my mind. "Amelia, how did you know to find us here?" A moment of silence followed. Amelia seemed to be contemplating how to answer us. Even though she hadn't said a word, I knew the answer would be deeply unsettling. When she finally found her words, she simply turned and looked out the window and said, "He told me." She glanced quickly back at us before turning back to the window and continuing, "I can hear his voice from everywhere. He's been saying a lot of things, and those things have scared me. You both need to know." I didn't know what to think about what she was saying. As much as I wanted to dismiss the idea that she was receiving psychic messages from her potentially deceased grandfather, I had seen too many things to rule anything out. On the other hand, this wasn't the first time I'd seen someone do something horrific and then blame it on voices in their head, but ultimately, I had to approach this situation rationally. I couldn't believe in the supernatural element until I saw it with my own eyes. I suggested that we should take her into town. Ideally, we would take her to the hospital to get checked out, and perhaps she could provide the local police with any information she received from her grandfather's voice. Josh dismissed this idea and insisted that Amelia should stay. She was adamant that letting Amelia go without monitoring and reassurance would be like abandoning her, and she didn't want to do that to a dear friend's family. It was an argument I didn't entirely agree with, but it was an argument I respected. We prepared the living room for Amelia and spent the rest of the day fishing and taking turns watching her. Throughout the day, Amelia sat silently in her room. She sat on the bed and looked out the window, seemingly deep in thought. I tried to talk to her, but all I got was a brief glance in my direction. Eventually, the time came for me to go to bed. I walked into the kitchen to brush my teeth and found Amelia sitting at the table, drinking a cup of tea. By this point, I didn't expect any acknowledgement of my presence, but to my surprise, she greeted me warmly. "Hello." "A bit unexpected," I replied to her, but ultimately didn't think much of it until she stood up and started to walk away. Just before entering her room, she stopped, turned back, and stared at me, a strange, unsettling smile on her face. "You've seen terrible things, haven't you? It's painful." And with that, she simply returned to her room. I sat there in silence, just thinking. What was Amelia implying? The supernatural? The murders I'd investigated in my career? Or something more personal? I didn't know this girl for more than 48 hours. How could she know something? Either way, her words made me uneasy. When I finally got into bed, Detective Jones asked me why I took so long, and I couldn't tell her the truth. Perhaps it was a mistake. At some point, you just want to end all this strangeness and move on with your life. I told Detective Jones that I was just thinking, and when she tried to press for details, I promised to tell her in the morning. Luckily, she accepted my answer. Detective Jones quickly fell asleep in my arms, but even though she was right next to me, I felt alone. Amelia's words triggered a flood of memories that plunged me into a dreamless sleep, a ritual I had become strangely accustomed to. Oddly enough, the only image I recalled was that of the observer saying that we would all be safer with them. I don't know how long I'd been asleep, but it was clearly very early in the morning when I woke up. The sun had just begun to rise, and Amelia had pulled the blanket over her face on the other side of the bed. I lay there with my eyes wide open, realizing I couldn't fall back asleep. With a soft groan, I dragged myself out of bed, got dressed, and went to the kitchen for a glass of water and to brush my teeth. When I arrived, the first thing I noticed was a 9-bullet left on the table. Confused, I went to Amelia's room and found she was gone. The room was clean, with nothing to indicate she had left in a hurry. Initially, I thought that perhaps she had gone into the woods to shoot. Maybe Detective Jones had told her where to find a gun while watching her. As I went outside to look for Amelia, I immediately noticed more bullets had been dropped, and they led to a nearby trail. As I reached the trailhead, I heard gunshots coming from the same direction. I thought I would follow the trail and hope to meet her at some point, but not long after I started walking, I heard a voice so familiar it sent shivers down my spine, emanating from deep within the woods. A voice so familiar that it made me freeze in my tracks. I swear I didn't move, hoping that voice would call out again. Tears began to stream down my face. I knew that it was probably just a cruel trick being played, but I didn't care. The moment I realized it was my son's voice calling me, my beloved child calling his father, I charged straight towards it. I had seen too much during my supernatural case investigations to have even a tiny shred of hope that somehow, some way, something had brought him back, but even with a 1% chance, I had to try. I ran and ran. The boy led me to his location. I called out to him. He needed to know that his father would finally be there for him. I didn't know where I was going, and I didn't care. I just kept going until I couldn't anymore, but ultimately, my efforts didn't bring me any closer to my son. Instead, I found myself in a dangerous situation. I had blindly run off the trail into the woods, and now all I had were rows of trees. How could I be so foolish? I thought to myself. The voice sounded so real, but all it led me to was getting lost. This was the first time I had to consider whether I was truly going insane. That thought grew stronger when I saw what appeared to be a face carved into the trunk of a tree directly to my right. Someone seemed to be in unimaginable pain. Their face was twisted by unbearable agony. A normal person would probably think this was a case of pareidolia, a phenomenon where people often see faces in unexpected places, but if this was just a random pattern, it was incredibly convincing. It seemed the bark had immediately grown around this person, capturing their moment of torment. As I walked to examine the tree behind it, I saw a similar sight. Another person in excruciating pain, frozen into the tree trunk. A third tree was the same, then a fourth. Soon, I realized I was surrounded by an army of petrified faces. Before I could fully process what had caused this gruesome exhibit, my son's voice cut through the confusion again. It didn't take long to find the source, a tree that appeared younger and more slender than the others. It was set back a bit further from the rest, and at its base was the face of a boy. He seemed to have been crying. I approached to wipe away the petrified tears from my son's face and kissed his forehead. A small smile appeared on my face, and I hugged the tree. It had been too long since I had last seen my son's face. "Don't cry, Dad, you finally made it," the boy said to me. I don't think I noticed my own tears. I quickly wiped them away as I tried to ask my son how he got there. "It was dark," he explained. "After that day, very dark. But one day I felt light, growth, and pain, and then light again." I wanted to talk more, to ask how to help, what I could do, but before I had a chance, another voice appeared. "My love, it's been too long," she said in her sweet, beautiful voice. "Amelia," I yelled, "how are you? Are you alive?" "Yes," she said gently with a chuckle. "Not thanks to you, you coward." "What?" I asked in disbelief. "No, this can't be real." But it is, her voice turned dark. You abandoned your wife and child to die, my love. I told you I wanted you to find a new job. I told you that putting people behind bars would create enemies. I told you, and now? She was leading me to finish the sentence, but I couldn't. No, no, I mumbled. No way. I stood up yelling, that's not them. That's some kind of illusion, a damned lie. A new voice emerged from the tree, a voice I didn't recognize. This voice was deep and even. A lie? No, Smith, we are truth, we are life. The final curtain had fallen. There was certainly something evil impersonating my family, and I grew furious. What kind of life can you be? Look around, all I see is a disgusting imitation of death. It chuckled coldly and unimpressed. We grow, our cells divide. We convert sunlight into energy, and you call that death? We have brought life back from the dead. Our roots and fungal network extend from here to your home and beyond. We connect everything. We absorb everything. We see everything. Its voice quickly shifted to that of a little girl. Do you remember me, Detective Smith? Eyes, who are you? Well, I'm the little girl you left to die because you were too confident to call for backup or stay and fight, no matter the cost of your life. You wanted to take all the glory for yourself, but when the heat got too much, you couldn't handle it, could you, coward? Faye Mizuki had returned from the dead. The biggest failure of my career was staring back at me, and I was speechless. The voice changed again. This time, the entity's choice shocked me, and I blurted out her name as it introduced itself. Amelia. That's right. You know there's a better path, Smith. A path where you can atone for the terrible things you've seen and done. Grandpa told me about joining this and becoming something more. At first, it was scary to think about leaving my old life, but we're so much happier now. That's how he found you, you know? He's been here all along, everywhere. I staggered backward at this horrific sight. Amelia, oh God, I'm so sorry. Why apologize? This is life. We will exist longer than everyone else. Centuries, and then grow again from the beginning. I can feel you're scared, but don't worry. Others were just as scared when they came here, but I can promise you they're much happier now. Wait, others came here, I asked. You don't mean the missing people, do you? Oh my God, that's where they went. You lured them in here and then. And then we showed them happiness, the monotonous voice finished. No one could know a better paradise. That's why they all suffered like hell, right? I spat back. Oh my God, just look at those faces. Its voice didn't waver. Growth is pain. As it said this, I felt something cut into my leg. Happiness requires growth, so you must experience pain to be happy. As much as I wanted to retort, I could feel my leg beginning to go numb, and my eyes gradually grew heavy. My final words became a jumbled mess of sounds, but I was still coherent enough to understand I was in danger. I tried to turn back, but my leg got caught on a stray root, and I tumbled to the forest floor. The trees seemed much larger now, their roots moving quickly towards me, wooden tentacles wrapping tightly around my legs. I screamed for them to go away, but it was no use. Multiple voices from every direction surrounded me, many voices I didn't recognize. You will be happy here. We live better together, one voice said. Why struggle to be separate? This is your destiny, another added. The pressure around my legs intensified, and try as I might, I couldn't break free from this creature. What I saw before my vision went dark were many fungal filaments and roots growing around me. My final thought was a small comfort, knowing that at least I would be reunited with my family. Silence enveloped me. No thoughts, no feelings. It was as if I was disconnected from the world, and in that moment of nothingness, I felt as if I too could just let go. Suddenly, light flooded my world. A dry heave followed, and so did the pains. Detective Jones was looking down at me. We were still outside, but in a different place than before. Before I could say anything, she pulled me into a tight embrace. Beside her was an axe covered in plant matter. I could only weakly ask, what happened? It appeared Detective Jones had noticed Amelia and I were missing after she woke up. The remaining bullets on the table concerned her, especially with previous reports of missing persons, so she grabbed an axe and set out to find us. The remaining bullets at the north end of the trail signaled to her the direction we had gone. As she searched, she also heard a voice that led her to where she needed to be, her father's voice. The difference between us was that Detective Jones wasn't swept up in the call. When she found me, almost my entire body was entangled in white and green fungal filaments. They writhed and grew as they invaded my body through multiple cuts. It seemed it took her at least half an hour to completely cut me free from the creature. What I couldn't understand was how she could ignore the entity. Surely, it wouldn't let her take me so easily. And as expected, it didn't. The voices of the deceased whispered sweet nothings of eternal life, happiness, and endless growth. Even Amelia tried to convince Detective Jones to join the afterlife as she had, by ending a bullet. For every fungal filament and root she cut, they tried to reconnect with her, so she had to maintain a constant attack to avoid being assimilated into the army of the dead. When I was finally free enough, she dragged me far enough away to escape whatever that entity was. I don't know what to say. What could I say? After hearing her story, I just sat there, reflecting on what had transpired. Of all the things I had seen and fought against, I had been bruised, scared, beaten, but never had something invaded my mind like that. Never had something broken me mentally. Detective Jones stayed with me the whole time I pondered until I finally uttered the magic words, "Let's go home." Packing up happened quickly, and we drove home in silence. When we finally arrived at my house, I said nothing as I got out of the car. A simple kiss on the forehead was our only means of communication, and it remained that way for the entire week. I spent the entire time at home just thinking. When the day came to return to work, I put on my best suit, arrived on time, and went straight to the chief's office to place my badge and gun on his desk, along with my official letter of resignation. "I'm done," I told him. He stared at the items for a moment, then looked up at me, leaned back in his chair, and calmly said, "It's about time." His indifferent attitude infuriated me. I had been through so many trials because of him, and when it was all over, that's all I got? What an insult. "What do you mean by that?" I yelled. Not a thank you, no attempt to convince me to stay, just a casual remark. He sat upright, calmly picked up my resignation letter, and gently placed it in his inbox. "Detective Smith, do you remember how many days you took off after your family passed away?" "No, I don't remember, but what does that have to do with?" "Not one," he interrupted. "Not one day off. Sure, homicide is challenging, but damn, if you didn't give it your all, your work was never affected. You never complained, Smith. Your ability to face adversity goes far beyond what most people can do. I needed that. I needed you to go through what you went through and still see things through. It's incredible. My God, if 90% of people knew that this was part of the job, they would never join the police force in the first place." His speech didn't cheer me up in the slightest. "So you exploited my pain for your own benefit, and that's okay." "Not at all." He paused for a moment to open a drawer, pull out a cigar, place it in his mouth, and light it in one fluid motion. "I know I'm not supposed to smoke in here, but screw it. Look, I'm not a heartless individual. The human part of me doesn't want anyone to have to deal with this, especially not anyone who's already been through so much. A part of me wished you would give up, but..." He paused to exhale and take another drag. "At the same time, some things are necessary. Someone has to deal with this. I want to do the right thing, Smith. You are the perfect person to help me do that. It goes beyond my feelings or yours. Judge me however you want about that. It will be very difficult to replace you, but the human part of me, the human element of me, is happy to see you go. So yes, it's about time." His words affected me more than I thought. I stood there, not knowing what to say. Eventually, I chose silence. I needed time to process all of this. I simply nodded, showing understanding, and with that, I left the office and never looked back. In the following months and years, I tried to return to a normal life. As I sit here writing these words, Detective Jones, or rather Evely, is talking to some of our friends about her baby shower. Officer Ryan is the most excited about it. He insists that our children will become best friends. Rewriting these stories has given me so much new insight into the events that transpired. Recounting them and reading the feedback has meant a lot to me, and I thank you all for that. I'm at a stage where I realize that truth is the greatest contribution I can make to people, and it feels great to be able to share that. As for the monsters, they haven't appeared unexpectedly anymore. No surprises. Life has become much better without them. However, Evely came home from work the other day and said that some birthday party ended with many people dead. Apparently, a neighbor mentioned something about a clown but didn't want to elaborate. As she told me, I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up, and that old urge to investigate began to return. A part of me felt that it wouldn't hurt to do some research, talk to some people, just to make sure everyone was okay, but another part of me said to enjoy the peaceful life. It's an internal debate I've had many times. Office work doesn't quite satisfy that craving, but perhaps it doesn't need to. Perhaps I can finally be content with simply being happy. We'll have to wait and see what the future holds. I'm truly excited to wait for it. And as always, stay safe, everyone.